On Father's Day, I stared at a cardboard box sitting on my porch. It had my name on it. It looked innocent enough, but when my wife Viola screamed from the hallway, "Don't touch it, Luther," I froze. She saw what I had missed. That box wasn't a gift from my daughter. It was a prison sentence wrapped in packing tape. I didn't open it. Instead, I made a phone call that turned my quiet suburban street into a crime scene. And when the police opened it for me, I realized my own family had just tried to bury me alive. Before I tell you how I fought back, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect yourself from the people who are supposed to love you. I am Luther Banks, 71 years old. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer ensuring that buildings in Chicago didn't collapse under their own weight. I know how things are built, and I know how they break. That Sunday morning started with the smell of roasted coffee and the silence I had grown to cherish. It was Father's Day. I wasn't expecting much. My daughter Nia hadn't called before noon in 3 years, not since she married Gavin. But then the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that sliced through the morning calm. I walked to the door, my joints protesting slightly with the humidity. I opened it. The porch was empty. There was no delivery truck driving away, no neighbor waving from the sidewalk. There was just a medium-sized brown cardboard box sitting on the welcome mat. No card, no ribbon, just a shipping label. I bent down and picked it up. Immediately, my internal alarm bells went off. The weight distribution was wrong. It was heavy, maybe 5 or 6 pounds, but the center of gravity shifted as I lifted it. Whatever was inside wasn't secured properly. It slid with a dull thud against the cardboard. I carried it into the kitchen and set it on the granite island. My wife Viola was in the living room reading her book. "Look what we have here," I called out. I grabbed my utility knife from the junk drawer. The blade clicked as I pushed it up. I was 1 inch away from slicing the tape when Viola's voice cracked like a whip. "Luther, stop! Don't you dare cut that tape!" I froze. Viola stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, her hand gripping the doorframe. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the box with the intensity of a hawk spotting a field mouse. "What is it, V?" I asked, my thumb hovering over the blade. "Look at the return address, Luther. Look at the stamp." I leaned in. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, so I pulled my magnifying glass from my pocket. I always carry it. Old habits from inspecting blueprints die hard. I magnified the label. It said County Department of Health. My heart skipped a beat. I worked for the city for 30 years. I know their mail. They use a specific metering machine with red ink. This stamp was black standard postage, the kind you buy at a grocery store kiosk. And the address wasn't printed. It was handwritten. I focused on the letters. The L in Luther looped unnecessarily at the bottom. The letters slanted aggressively to the left. I knew that handwriting. I had seen it on loan applications my son-in-law Gavin had begged me to co-sign. I had seen it on the birthday cards he forced my daughter to sign. It was Gavin's writing disguised, but not well enough to fool a man who looks for hairline fractures in concrete. Why would Gavin send me a package pretending to be the health department on Father's Day? Why not just hand it to me or mail it from his own name? The shifting weight inside the box suddenly felt sinister. The tape was applied haphazardly, thick layers of cheap packing tape sealing every seam as if the sender was desperate to keep something not just in, but hidden. Viola walked over and placed her hand over mine, gently lowering the knife. "That is not a gift, Luther," she whispered. "That is a trap." She was right. If I opened that box, my fingerprints would be on the flaps. I would be the one discovering the contents. I stepped back. I didn't touch it again. I picked up the phone and dialed 911. I didn't say I received a gift. I said there is a suspicious package on my counter with a fraudulent government return address. I want it removed. 10 minutes later, my quiet cul-de-sac was flashing with blue and red lights. The neighbors were peering through their blinds. A bomb squad technician entered my kitchen dressed in full protective gear. They didn't evacuate the house, but they made Viola and me stand in the backyard. They used a portable X-ray device first, then a remote manipulator to slice the tape. I watched through the sliding glass door. The technician stiffened. He waved over a uniformed officer. They weren't looking at wires or explosives. The officer reached in with gloved hands and pulled out 2 objects. The first was a plastic brick tightly wrapped but clearly identifiable as a large quantity of cocaine. The second was a snub-nosed revolver with the serial number filed off. My knees almost gave out. If I had opened that box, if I had touched that gun, my prints would have been the only ones on it. The officer placed the evidence in bags. He didn't look at the box anymore. He turned around and looked directly at me through the glass. He didn't see a retired engineer. He didn't see a grandfather. He saw an old black man with a kilo of drugs and an illegal firearm in his kitchen. He walked toward the glass door, his hand resting instinctively near his holster. "Mr. Banks," he said, his voice cold and devoid of the respect I had earned over 7 decades. "Step away from the door and put your hands where I can see them. We need to have a conversation about what you are moving through this house. Officer, I swear to you I have never seen that gun before in my life." My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking as I stood in my own kitchen with my palms raised. The officer did not care. He was already radioing for backup. Before I could explain that I was a retired structural engineer with a clean record and a pension from the city, not a drug runner. The front door burst open. It was my daughter Nia and her husband Gavin. They rushed in with a frantic energy that sucked the air out of the room. Gavin looked at the officer, then at the box on the counter, and finally at me. His eyes widened in a performance so perfect it made my stomach turn. "Oh God, Dad," he shouted, rushing over to me but stopping just short of a hug. "What have you done this time?" I stepped back, confused. What did he mean this time? I had never been in trouble with the law. Not once in 71 years. Nia stood by the doorway, wringing her hands, her face pale. She wouldn't look at me. Gavin turned to the officer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Officer, I am so sorry. My father-in-law has been struggling lately. He gets confused. He mixes up the past and the present. Sometimes he thinks he is back in the old days, running errands for his friends from prison." I felt the blood drain from my face. Prison. I had never been to prison. I had spent 30 years building bridges and inspecting foundations. I was a deacon at my church. Gavin was rewriting my history in real time, painting me as a senile ex-convict relapsing into a life of crime. I tried to speak to correct this insanity, but the officer held up a hand to silence me. He was listening to Gavin. Gavin continued shaking his head sadly. "We tried to tell him to stop contacting those people, officer. We told him it was dangerous. But he keeps talking about making one last score. He says he needs the adrenaline. Lies. Malicious, calculated lies." I looked at Nia, my baby girl, waiting for her to step in to tell the officer that her father was a respected man who spent his weekends gardening and fixing antique clocks, not trafficking cocaine. But Nia just looked at the floor and nodded weakly. "Yes, officer," she whispered. "My dad has been acting very strange lately." That betrayal cut deeper than any knife. My own daughter was corroborating a narrative that turned me into a criminal. The officer looked at me with a mix of pity and suspicion. His hand moved to his radio again. "Dispatch, send the K9 unit. We have probable cause for a full search." 10 minutes later, my sanctuary was being torn apart. A German shepherd strained against its leash, barking furiously as it was led through my living room. Officers were pulling books off the shelves I had built with my own hands. They were emptying drawers onto the floor. I stood in the kitchen, guarded by a rookie cop, watching my life get dismantled. Viola sat on a stool, her back straight, her eyes filled with a cold fury I hadn't seen since someone tried to cheat us on a car repair 20 years ago. She knew. She saw exactly what was happening. Then the dog went crazy in the master bedroom. I heard the heavy thud of a mattress being overturned. A shout came from the back of the house. "Sarge, you need to see this." The sergeant walked out of my bedroom holding a large, clear evidence bag. Inside were stacks of cash, old bills, 10s and 20s, mostly bound with rubber bands. It looked like street money. Dirty money. I stared at it in disbelief. That was my bedroom. That was my bed. I slept on that mattress every single night. I knew every lump and crevice. There was no money under there this morning when I made the bed. The sergeant walked up to me and held the bag at eye level. $50,000 in cash, Mr. Banks. Care to explain why a retired engineer keeps 50 grand in small bills under his mattress? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The logic of the trap was closing around me. The package, the gun, the drugs, and now the cash. It was a perfect tableau of a dealer's house. But then as the sergeant turned away, a scent wafted from the bedroom. It was faint, masked by the smell of the dog and the officers, but my nose is sensitive. It was a cloying, musky smell. Cheap cologne. Specifically, it was a brand called Midnight Prowler. I knew that smell because I hated it. I had asked Gavin repeatedly not to wear it in my house because it gave me a migraine. Gavin was standing in the kitchen doorway looking concerned, but he hadn't entered the bedroom since the police arrived. Yet his scent was fresh in my room. It was lingering in the air where the mattress had been flipped. He had been there. Not today, but recently. Maybe while I was at the hardware store yesterday, maybe while I was in the garden. He had planted that money. He had violated the sanctity of my marriage bed to frame me. I looked at Gavin. He caught my eye, and for a split second the mask slipped. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. It wasn't a smile of relief. It was a smirk of victory. He knew I smelled him. He knew I figured it out, and he knew it didn't matter because the police had the cash. I felt a surge of righteous anger rising in my throat. I took a step forward, my fists clenching. "You son of a..." I started to shout. I was going to tell them everything. I was going to scream about the cologne, about the lies, about the fact that Gavin hadn't held a steady job in 2 years. The phone in my pocket vibrated violently. It was the emergency line I had set up with my old friend Alistair Wright. Alistair was the best defense attorney in Chicago, a man who could argue with a brick wall and win. I had texted him the moment I saw the gun in the box. I pulled the phone out before the rookie could stop me and answered. "Put it on speaker," the officer ordered. I hit the button. Alistair's voice boomed out deep and commanding like the voice of God himself. "Luther, do not say a single word." I opened my mouth to explain, but Alistair cut me off. I said, "Silence, Luther. I am listening to the police scanner. I know what they found. You are being set up. Anything you say right now will be twisted. Do not explain the money. Do not accuse anyone. They will arrest you for resisting if you get aggressive. Let them take you. I will meet you at the station." Silence. I clamped my mouth shut. Alistair was right. If I screamed at Gavin now, I would look like a violent, unhinged criminal. I would be playing the role Gavin had written for me. I took a deep breath and held my hands out. The sergeant nodded. He pulled a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. The sound of them ratcheting tight around my wrists was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of my dignity being stripped away. "Turn around, Mr. Banks." They marched me out of my own front door. My neighbors, the Johnsons and the Garcias, were standing on their lawns watching. These were people I had shared barbecue with, people whose fences I had helped repair. Now they watched me being led away in cuffs like a common thug. I kept my head high. I looked straight ahead, refusing to show shame. As I passed the threshold, I looked back one last time. Viola was standing by the window, her hand pressed against the glass, her eyes promising war. And behind the police line, standing next to my weeping daughter, was Gavin. He wasn't looking at Nia. He wasn't looking at the floor. He was looking right at me. And as the officer pushed my head down to get me into the back of the patrol car, I saw Gavin smile. It was a full teeth-baring grin of a predator who thinks he has just taken down the biggest game in the forest. He thought he had won. He thought the game was over. But as the cruiser pulled away, I sat in the hard plastic seat and closed my eyes. I wasn't thinking about the cell awaiting me. I was thinking about the structural integrity of Gavin's plan. He had built it fast. He had built it on lies. And like any structure built without a solid foundation, it had cracks. I just had to find them and bring the whole thing crashing down on his head. The interrogation room was a cold, windowless box designed to strip a man of his dignity. I sat on a metal chair bolted to the floor, my hands resting flat on the table. Across from me, Detective Reynolds flipped through a file thick with photos of my kitchen, my bedroom, and the cash found under my mattress. He looked tired. He looked bored. He looked like a man who had already decided the ending of this story. "Mr. Banks, let's make this simple," Reynolds said, leaning back. "We found 50 grand in unmarked bills. We found a kilo of cocaine. We found a gun. At your age, do you really want to spend the rest of your life fighting this? Just give us your supplier, and maybe the DA goes easy on you." I looked at him with the patience I used to reserve for junior architects who tried to put load-bearing walls on top of floating floorboards. "Detective, look at the photos of the money bag," I said, my voice calm and level. Reynolds frowned but didn't look. "Look at the dust patterns," I continued. "Under my bed there is a layer of dust consistent with a 2-week cleaning cycle. But the bag itself, it is pristine. There is no dust on the plastic, no lint, no settling. That bag was placed there recently, within the last 24 hours. And the gun. Did you check the striations on the serial number filing? It was done with a high-speed rotary tool, likely a Dremel. I own hand tools, detective. I have never owned a Dremel in my life. Check my garage. Reynolds slammed the file shut. Enough with the CSI routine, Mr. Banks. You are not an engineer right now. You are a suspect in a major narcotics investigation. The physical evidence is overwhelming. We don't need your commentary on dust bunnies. We need a confession. I leaned back and closed my mouth. There was no point in arguing with a man who was looking at the surface cracks while ignoring the foundation sinking. I waited. 2 hours later, the door opened. It wasn't the detective. It was Alistair Wright. He looked impeccable in his charcoal suit, a sharp contrast to the drab gray of the station. He carried a briefcase and an air of absolute authority. "Get up, Luther," Alistair said. "You are leaving. Bail has been set." It was steep, but I covered it. "The DA wanted to hold you without bond, but I reminded him that you are 71 years old with a pacemaker and zero flight risk. However, there are conditions." A deputy entered the room carrying a black plastic device. He instructed me to roll up my pant leg. I felt the cold, hard plastic snap around my ankle. A green light blinked on. "House arrest, Mr. Banks," the deputy said. "You step outside your property line and this thing alerts us. We will be there in 5 minutes to drag you back to a cell. Do not test us." I stood up, the device heavy and shaming against my skin. It felt like a brand, a mark of ownership by the state. I walked out of the station with my head high, but inside I felt the structural integrity of my life groaning under the pressure. The ride home was silent. Alistair drove his black sedan with precision. "Luther," he said finally, his eyes on the road, "this is bad. They froze your accounts. All of them. The checking account, the savings, even the joint account with Viola. The prosecution is framing this as a RICO case, alleging that your assets are proceeds from illegal activities. You cannot access a dime. Not for groceries, not for bills, not for my fees." I turned to look at him, shock finally piercing through my calm facade. "Everything I asked, everything," Alistair confirmed. "You are financially paralyzed until we can prove the source of that cash was not you. And that could take months." When we pulled into my driveway, the house looked different. It wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a prison. The front door still had yellow police tape residue on the frame. I walked inside, my ankle monitor chafing with every step. Viola was sitting at the kitchen table staring at a stack of unpaid bills. She didn't cry when she saw me. She just stood up and held me. Her grip was iron. "We will fix this, Luther," she whispered. "We have been through worse. We survived the riots in '68. We survived the recession. We will survive this." But survival felt very far away when the front door opened 20 minutes later. It was Gavin. He walked in without knocking, as if he owned the place. He was wearing a new leather jacket and carrying a greasy paper bag from a fast food joint. He stopped in the doorway, looking at my ankle monitor, then up at my face. He didn't look scared anymore. He looked emboldened. He threw the bag onto the kitchen table. It landed with a heavy, wet thud right on top of the bills Viola had been sorting. "Dinner," he announced, his voice dripping with a false magnanimity. "Double cheeseburgers. Eat up while it is warm." I stared at the bag. I hadn't eaten fast food in 10 years. Gavin knew that. He knew I watched my cholesterol. This wasn't a meal. It was an insult. "I am not hungry, Gavin," I said, my voice low. Gavin laughed, a sharp barking sound. "You better get hungry, Luther, because this is it. I just got off the phone with Naya. Since your accounts are frozen, we are going to have to make some changes around here. Someone has to manage the household expenses while you are indisposed. Since I am the man of the house now, I will be handling the finances." The man of the house. The audacity took my breath away. This parasite who hadn't paid a utility bill in his life was standing in my kitchen, claiming my throne. "You are not managing anything," I said, stepping forward. "Get out of my house." Gavin didn't flinch. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. I smelled that cheap cologne again, the same scent that had been in my bedroom. He lowered his voice to a hiss. "You are confused, Luther. You are a senile old man under house arrest for drug trafficking. You don't give orders anymore. You take them. If you want the lights to stay on, if you want food in the fridge, you will sign over temporary power of attorney to Nia and me. Otherwise, you and Viola can starve in the dark." I wanted to strike him. My fist clenched at my side. I calculated the trajectory. A hook to the jaw would shatter his teeth. But I saw the glint in his eye. He wanted me to hit him. If I assaulted him while wearing an ankle monitor, I would go straight back to jail and Viola would be left alone with these wolves. I forced my hand open. I took a deep breath. I didn't say a word. I just turned my back on him and walked to the sink to pour a glass of water. My silence infuriated him more than any scream could have. "Fine, be stubborn," he spat. "See how far that gets you." He grabbed a burger from the bag and started eating it aggressively, chomping with his mouth open, crumbs falling onto my clean floor. He began to pace the room. I watched him over the rim of my glass. I switched from participant to observer. I became the engineer inspecting a faulty structure for stress points. Gavin wasn't just pacing aimlessly, he was walking a pattern. 3 steps to the window, turn. 5 steps to the hallway, turn. His eyes weren't on me. They were darting around the room, scanning the walls. He stopped in front of the fireplace. Above the mantel hung a large oil painting of a landscape Viola had bought in New Orleans 30 years ago. It was a heavy piece with a thick, gilded frame. Gavin stared at it. He took a bite of his burger, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't looking at the art. He was looking at the edge of the frame where it met the wall. He shifted his weight, leaning in slightly, then pulled back as if catching himself. I knew that look. I knew what was behind that painting. It was an old wall safe installed by the previous owners in the 50s. I hadn't used it in years. It was empty save for some old tax returns and a broken watch. But Gavin didn't know it was empty. He just knew it was there. He had probably found the original blueprints in my study during his snooping. He was looking for the mother lode. He thought my secret fortune was behind that canvas. I took a slow sip of water. My heart rate steadied. Gavin was arrogant, but he was also desperate. He needed money fast to pay off whatever debts had driven him to this madness. He thought he had checkmated me by freezing my bank accounts. He thought cutting off my supply lines would force me to surrender. But he was looking for treasure in a wall safe while the real foundation of my wealth was buried so deep he wouldn't even know where to start digging. He turned around, catching me watching him. "What are you looking at, old man?" he sneered. I set the glass down on the counter with a deliberate click. "I am just looking at a man who doesn't know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a facade," I said quietly. Gavin scoffed. "You are losing it, Luther. Enjoy the burger. It might be the last hot meal you get for a while." He stormed out the front door, slamming it hard enough to rattle the windows. I waited until the sound of his truck faded down the street. Then I walked over to the painting. I reached behind the frame and felt the cold steel of the safe dial. It was still locked. He hadn't cracked it yet, but he would try. And when he opened it and found nothing but dust, his desperation would spike. That was good. Desperate men make mistakes. Unstable structures collapse when you apply pressure to the right points. I looked at Viola. She was holding the fast food bag with 2 fingers like it was toxic waste. "Throw it out," I said. She nodded and dropped it into the trash. We ate oatmeal for dinner that night. It was plain and made with water because we were out of milk. But as I sat there, my ankle throbbing under the plastic shackle, I didn't feel trapped anymore. I felt focused. Gavin had made his move. He had shown his hand. He wanted control. He wanted the money, and he was willing to starve us to get it. But he had made a fatal error. He assumed that because I was old, I was weak. He assumed that because I was silent, I was confused. He didn't know that an engineer does his best work in the quiet before the demolition. I looked at the painting one more time. I knew exactly what I had to do. I needed to let him think he was winning. I needed to lure him in. And then when he was standing right where I wanted him, I would pull the pin. The doorbell rang at 9 in the morning with a jarring persistence that signaled bad news. I was sitting in my armchair staring at the ankle monitor blinking green on my leg when Gavin walked in. He was not alone. A short, sweating man in a rumpled suit trailed behind him carrying a battered briefcase. The man smelled of stale tobacco and cheap aftershave. Gavin gestured to him with a flourish that was entirely too theatrical for a Wednesday morning. "Dad, this is Mr. Miller. He is a lawyer I know from the city. He specializes in asset forfeiture cases. I brought him here to help us." Miller did not offer to shake my hand. He sat on the edge of the sofa and opened his briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents. He looked at me with eyes that were watery and dismissive. "Mr. Banks, let us be frank," he began, his voice rasping like sandpaper. "The charges against you are catastrophic. Trafficking, possession of an unregistered firearm, money laundering. The state is already moving to seize everything you own under civil forfeiture laws. Your house, your pension, your savings. They will take it all and leave your wife on the street while you rot in a cell." I watched him. I analyzed him. This was not a high-powered attorney. This was a bottom feeder, a man who made his living scaring desperate people into bad decisions. But I let my shoulders slump. I let my lower lip tremble. "What can I do?" I whispered, forcing my voice to crack. Miller leaned forward, smelling blood. "You need to transfer administrative control of your assets immediately. If the assets are managed by a third-party guardian, specifically a family member with a clean record, the state has a harder time freezing them. You need to sign a power of attorney granting full financial control to your son-in-law. It is the only way to save your home." Gavin stood by the window trying to look somber, but his foot was tapping a frantic rhythm against the floorboards. He was practically vibrating with greed. "Do it, Dad," he urged. "Do it for Mom. If you go to prison, at least, let me make sure she has a roof over her head." The audacity was breathtaking. He was threatening me with the very homelessness he intended to cause. But I nodded slowly, letting my head hang low. "Okay," I said. "Okay, save the house." Gavin rushed to the table and slammed the document down in front of me. It was a general durable power of attorney. I scanned the fine print. It gave him the power to sell real estate, access bank accounts, and liquidate investments. It was a license to steal. Gavin shoved a pen into my hand. "Sign right there at the bottom," he said, pointing to the line. I took the pen. I am right-handed. I have been right-handed for 71 years. My drafting hand was steady enough to draw blueprints for skyscrapers without a ruler. But in that moment, I switched the pen to my left hand. I let my hand hover over the paper, and then I started to shake. I made my arm spasm violently, mimicking the tremors I had seen in my own father during his final years. I watched Gavin's eyes. He wasn't looking at my hand. He was looking at the paper, waiting for the ink to hit the page. He was so blinded by the prize he didn't notice the mechanics of the deception. "I cannot hold it steady," I stammered, the pen dancing wildly over the signature line. "Just sign it," Old Man Miller snapped, losing his professional veneer entirely. "Just make a mark." I pressed the tip to the paper. I didn't sign Luther Banks. With a jagged, illegible scrawl, I wrote Luther Bunks. I changed the A to a U. It was a small structural flaw, a hairline fracture in the legal document. To the naked eye, it looked like the signature of a terrified, shaking old man. In a court of law, it was a forgery signed by a non-existent person. I dropped the pen as if exhausted. Gavin snatched the paper away instantly. He stared at the signature, his eyes wide. He didn't see the misspelling. He didn't see the wrong hand. He only saw the keys to the kingdom. "Perfect," he breathed. He looked at Miller and grinned. "We are done here." Miller stuffed the paper into his briefcase and stood up without a word. They walked out of the house without saying goodbye, without asking if we needed groceries, without checking if Viola was okay. They walked out like men who had just pulled off the heist of the century. That night, the house was quiet. The ankle monitor hummed its low electric frequency, a constant reminder of my cage. Viola and I lay in bed, the lights off the room illuminated only by the street lamp outside. She was rigid beside me, her anger radiating like heat. "They took it. Luther," she whispered in the dark. "They have the power of attorney. They are going to sell the house tomorrow. I know it." I reached out and took her hand. Her skin was soft, familiar, the only constant in my life. I squeezed it gently. "Let them try, Viola," I whispered back. My voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was the voice of the man who had built bridges across the Chicago River. "You saw me sign that paper, but you did not see what I signed." I used my left hand. I misspelled my name. "That document is void ab initio. It is worthless." Viola turned her head on the pillow, her eyes searching mine in the shadows. "But Luther, even if the paper is bad, they will try to use it. They will go to the bank. They will go to the land title office. It will cause a mess." I smiled in the dark. "Let them go to the bank," I said. "Let them walk in there and present that paper to the manager. Do you know what they will find?" Viola shook her head. "They will find a ghost Viola, because Luther Banks does not own anything." She sat up slightly confused. "What are you talking about?" 5 years ago, I said quietly. 5 years ago, when Gavin first started talking about cryptocurrency when he lost his job and lied about it, I saw the cracks in the foundation. I saw that he was a load-bearing wall that was going to buckle. So I went to a different lawyer, a lawyer Gavin doesn't know. I created the bank's family trust. I transferred the deed to the house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio, everything into the trust. You and I are the beneficiaries, but we are not the trustees. The trustee is an independent firm downtown. I paused, letting the weight of it settle. That power of attorney Gavin holds gives him control over the assets of Luther Banks, but Luther Banks owns nothing but the clothes on his back and a checking account with $200 in it. The house belongs to the trust. The money belongs to the trust. He has the key to a safe that has been empty for half a decade. Viola let out a long, slow breath, a sound of pure relief. "You never told me," she said. "I wanted to be wrong," I admitted. "I wanted to believe that he would get better, that Nia would leave him, that I was just being a paranoid old engineer. But I prepared for the collapse anyway, because you do not wait for the building to fall before you reinforce the steel. Gavin thinks he is the Trojan horse," I said, closing my eyes. "He thinks he has wheeled himself inside our walls, and tonight he is going to climb out and slaughter us while we sleep. But he doesn't know that he is not in Troy. He is in a testing facility, and I am about to turn on the crusher. The trap has snapped shut, Viola. But it didn't catch us. It caught him by the throat. And tomorrow when he tries to swallow, he is going to choke." The knock on the door came at 2 in the afternoon. It was a soft, hesitant sound, not the aggressive pounding of the police or the arrogant rapping of Gavin. I was sitting in the living room staring at the ankle monitor that blinked every 3 seconds, reminding me that I was a prisoner in the home I had paid for with 40 years of sweat and calculations. I stood up, my joints popping, and walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw Nia, my daughter, my only child. She was holding a Tupperware container and her eyes were red and swollen. For a fleeting moment, my heart softened. I thought perhaps she had broken free from Gavin's spell. I thought maybe she was bringing me gumbo, bringing me an apology, bringing me back my little girl. I opened the door. Nia didn't look at me. She stepped inside, her shoulders hunched as if she were carrying a physical weight. She set the container on the entry table without a word. It was cold pasta salad from the grocery store deli, not a home-cooked meal. A peace offering bought for $4.99. She turned to me, and then she did something that froze the blood in my veins. She dropped to her knees. Right there on the hardwood floor I had refinished myself, she collapsed into a pile of sobbing fabric. "Daddy, please," she wailed, grabbing my hand with a desperation that felt wet and clammy. "You have to save us." I tried to pull her up. "Get off the floor, Nia," I said, my voice gruff. "We are Banks. We do not beg." But she wouldn't stand. She clung to my hand, her nails digging into my skin. "You have to take the deal, Daddy. You have to plead guilty. Gavin says if you admit the gun and the drugs were yours, the prosecutor will go easy on you because of your age. You will just get probation, maybe house arrest for a year. But if you fight it, if you drag this out, they will come for everything." I stared down at the top of her head. The braids I used to plait when she was a child were now covered by a silk scarf I had bought her last Christmas. My brain tried to process the request. My daughter was asking me to confess to a felony. She was asking me to destroy my name, my reputation, and my freedom. Why Nia? I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I could barely contain. Why would I confess to a crime I did not commit? Why would I destroy my life for a lie? She looked up then, and I saw the truth in her eyes. It wasn't love. It wasn't concern. It was terror. Pure, unadulterated terror. "Because we owe them, Daddy," she whispered. "We owe them $500,000. The number hung in the air like a toxic gas. 500,000, $500,000. I stepped back, pulling my hand from her grip. "Who is we, Nia? Who do you owe $500,000 to?" She hiccuped, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "Gavin. He tried to invest in crypto. He leveraged everything. He borrowed from private lenders, Daddy. Bad men. They aren't like the bank. They said if we don't pay by the end of the month, they are going to kill him. They sent pictures, Daddy. Pictures of us sleeping. They know where we live." I looked at her, and for the first time I saw Gavin not as a nuisance, but as a cancer. He had metastasized. He had infected my daughter with his greed and stupidity, and now the disease was threatening to kill the host. "So you want me to go to prison?" I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You want me to become a felon so you can sell my house to pay off your husband's gambling debts? Is that it? You want to liquidate my life to save his?" Nia scrambled to her feet, wiping her face. "It is the only way, Daddy. The house is the only asset worth enough. If you go to prison or get probation, we get power of attorney. We can sell it quickly. We can pay them off. We can start over." "And what about me, Nia?" I asked. "What about your mother? Where do we go?" She looked at me, and then she said the words that severed the last thread of the umbilical cord. The words that turned my heart into a block of cold concrete. "Daddy, you are old," she said, her voice rising in a pitch of hysterical justification. "You are 71. You have lived your life. You had your career. You had your travels. You had everything. Gavin is young. I am young. We have our whole lives ahead of us. If you go to jail, it is just a few years. You can handle it. You are strong. But Gavin, he cannot survive this. You have to sacrifice for us. That is what parents do, right? You sacrifice. What is a little sacrifice when you are going to die soon anyway?" The silence that followed was absolute. The clock on the wall ticked. The refrigerator hummed. My heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "You are old. You are going to die soon anyway." I looked at the woman standing in front of me. I looked for the little girl who used to sit on my lap while I read blueprints. I looked for the teenager I taught to drive in the church parking lot. I looked for the young woman I walked down the aisle. She was gone. This woman was a stranger who viewed my remaining years as a currency she could spend to fix her mistakes. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. An engineer knows that when a structure is compromised beyond repair, you do not try to patch it. You condemn it. I straightened my back. I felt the steel in my spine, the iron in my blood. I looked her in the eye and I saw her flinch because she didn't see her father anymore. She saw Luther Banks. "Get out," I said. "Daddy, please," she started. "Get out," I repeated, my voice flat and hard like a slate roof. "Take your pasta salad, take your husband's debts, and get out of my house." She stared at me, shocked that her emotional manipulation had hit a wall it could not breach. She grabbed her purse and ran out the door sobbing. I watched her go. I watched her get into her car and drive away. I locked the door. I slid the deadbolt home. Then I walked to my bedroom. I went to the bottom drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a small black leather notebook. It was my estate planning book. In it was the handwritten draft of my will, the instructions for the trust, the distribution of assets. I turned to the page marked Beneficiaries. At the top, written in my careful block lettering, was Nia Banks. I took a red pen from my pocket. I didn't hesitate. I didn't shake. I drew a single thick red line through her name. Then I wrote next to it, "Disinherited, reason attempted coercion and moral bankruptcy." I closed the book. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the silence of my empty house. It was a lonely sound, but it was better than the sound of a daughter telling her father that his life was over just because he had gray hair. I was not dead yet, and as long as there was breath in my lungs, I would not be a sacrifice on the altar of Gavin's greed. They wanted a victim. Instead, they had just created an enemy, and they were about to learn that this old building still had a few trapdoors they knew nothing about. Hunger is a powerful motivator, but paranoia is a better survivalist. It had been 24 hours since I had eaten a full meal. My stomach was cramping, twisting into knots that made my hands shake. I was sitting in the dim light of the kitchen listening to the hum of the refrigerator when Gavin walked in. He was carrying a tray. On it sat a steaming bowl of tomato bisque and a glass of water. He placed it on the table in front of me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I made you something warm, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with a synthetic kindness that made my skin crawl. "You need to keep your strength up. We cannot have you getting sick before your court date." I looked at the soup. It was a deep, rich red smelling of basil and cream. But beneath the comfort food aroma, my nose picked up something else. It was faint, a subtle chemical undertone that a layman might have missed. But I spent 30 years working around industrial solvents and chemical compounds. I knew the smell of contamination. It was metallic with a sharp, bitter edge like crushing raw almonds. It wasn't poison meant to kill me right there. It was a sedative. Likely a heavy dose of benzodiazepines crushed and stirred into the cream to mask the texture. Gavin wasn't trying to feed me. He was trying to sedate me. He needed me pliable. He needed me unconscious so he could move me without a fight. I looked up at him. He was watching me with an intensity that betrayed his anxiety. "Eat up," he urged. "It is good." I nodded slowly, picking up the spoon. I lifted it to my lips, my hand trembling, not from age but from rage. Just as the spoon touched my mouth, I let it slip. It clattered into the bowl, splashing soup onto the table. Oh, clumsy me, I muttered. I grabbed a napkin and in the commotion I knocked the bowl over. The red liquid poured over the edge of the table and straight into the large potted fern that sat on the floor. Gavin shouted in frustration, "Damn it, Luther, look what you did!" I didn't answer. I stood up, clutching my chest. I let my eyes roll back in my head. I let my knees buckle. I collapsed onto the linoleum floor, my body convulsing in a rhythmic spasm that I had seen once when a construction worker touched a live wire. It was a performance born of desperation. I thrashed against the cabinets, knocking over a chair. Gavin didn't rush to help me. He didn't check my airway. He stood over me, watching with a cold, clinical detachment. He pulled out his phone. But he didn't dial 911. He dialed a number he had saved. "It is happening," he said into the receiver. "Bring the van. He is going down now." I lay on the cold floor, forcing my breathing to be shallow, forcing my muscles to go limp. Gavin nudged me with the toe of his boot. When I didn't react, he let out a sigh of relief. Finally, he whispered. 10 minutes later, I heard the vehicle pull into the driveway. It wasn't the wail of a siren. It was the heavy rumble of a diesel engine. I kept my eyes slit open just a fraction. 2 men entered the kitchen. They weren't paramedics. They wore gray jumpsuits with no insignias. They didn't carry defibrillators or trauma kits. They carried a straitjacket and a canvas stretcher. "Is he out?" one of the men asked, his voice rough like gravel. "He should be," Gavin replied. "He didn't eat the soup, but he had some kind of attack, maybe a stroke. Just get him out of here before the neighbors see." They lifted me onto the stretcher with zero regard for my comfort. They strapped my wrists and ankles down tight. They carried me out the back door, avoiding the front yard where Mrs. Johnson might be gardening. They loaded me into the back of a windowless white van. The interior smelled of bleach and old sweat. It was a transport for the unwanted. As the doors slammed shut, plunging me into darkness, I realized Gavin's plan had shifted gears. He wasn't waiting for the courts. He was erasing me. The ride was bumpy and long. I counted the turns, mapping the route in my head. Left on Main, right onto the highway. We were heading north, away from the city center, away from the legitimate hospitals. We were heading toward the industrial district where the zoning laws were loose and the oversight was non-existent. The van finally slowed, turning onto gravel. Through the partition, I heard the driver speak to a guard. "Delivery for Sunnyvale. Room 402. Sunnyvale." The name sounded like a retirement resort. The reality was a warehouse converted into a holding pen for the elderly whose families wanted to forget them. It was a place where valid medical licenses went to die and where a power of attorney was a death warrant. The doors opened and the humid air hit my face. I stayed limp. They wheeled me into a building that smelled of pine cleaner and despair. I heard moans from other rooms, the sound of a television blaring to cover the silence of neglect. A doctor with a stained lab coat met us in the hallway. He shone a light in my eyes. I didn't flinch. "Comatose or faking," he muttered. "Doesn't matter. Put him in isolation. We will start the chemical restraint protocol in the morning. Once I sign the incompetence papers, the son can sell the house." They wheeled me into a small room with padded walls and a single bolted-down bed. They began to strip me. They took my shoes. They took my belt. They took my wallet. This was the moment. This was the only chance I had. On my left wrist, I wore an old, bulky hiking watch. It looked like a cheap piece of plastic junk scuffed from years of gardening. The orderly reached for it. "Wait," the doctor said. "Check his pockets first. I need his insurance card." The orderly turned away to rummage through my pants, which were thrown on a chair. In that split second of distraction, I moved. My hand flew to the side of the watch. There were 4 buttons. I didn't press one. I pressed the top left and bottom right simultaneously and held them for 3 seconds. The watch gave a tiny, almost inaudible vibration against my wristbone. It was a GPS beacon, a climber's failsafe. I had bought it years ago for hiking in the Rockies, but I had reprogrammed it with Alistair. It sent a single distress signal with my exact coordinates to his secure server. It was the Omega Protocol. It meant I have been taken. Come get me. The orderly turned back and ripped the watch off my wrist. He threw it into a plastic bin with my other effects. "Nice try, Grandpa," he sneered, though he didn't know what I had done. He thought I was just clinging to a keepsake. He didn't know I had just lit a flare that was burning bright on a digital map in a high-rise office downtown. They left me in the dark wearing a thin hospital gown, shivering on a plastic mattress. The lock clicked with a heavy finality. I lay there in the silence, listening to the retreating footsteps. Gavin thought he had buried me in a hole where no one would look. He thought he had won. But he didn't know that I wasn't just an old man in a cell. I was a beacon, and the cavalry was already on its way. I closed my eyes and visualized the signal traveling through the airwaves. I wasn't scared, I was ready. Because tomorrow, when they came to inject me with their chemical lobotomy, they were going to find that the patient had very powerful friends. I woke up to the hum of fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped insects. My head throbbed. I was lying on a mattress that felt more like a slab of concrete covered in thin vinyl. I sat up slowly, testing my limbs. The room was small and sterile. The walls were padded with a beige material that smelled of old sweat and bleach. I looked toward the window. It was reinforced with heavy iron bars painted white to blend in, but I knew steel when I saw it. They were bolted into the structural frame of the building. There was no way out through there, not without a blowtorch. The heavy metal door clicked and swung open. A man in scrubs walked in. He wasn't the doctor who had admitted me. This was a younger man with dead eyes and a syringe on a metal tray. He didn't speak to me. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He just walked over to the bedside table and set down a small paper cup containing 2 blue pills. "Take them," he said, his voice flat. "Doctor's orders. It will help you sleep." I looked at the pills. They weren't for sleep. I knew that shade of blue. It was a potent muscle relaxant often used in psychiatric wards to make patients compliant. It turned your limbs to jelly and your mind to fog. If I took those, I wouldn't be able to stand, let alone escape. I looked up at the orderly. "What is it?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Just vitamins, Grandpa, take them, or we do it the hard way." He stepped closer, looming over me. I picked up the cup. My hand trembled not from fear, but from a calculated performance of frailty. I tossed the pills into my mouth. I let them hit the back of my throat, but I didn't swallow. I used my tongue to slide them into the pocket between my cheek and my gum. It was a trick I had learned from a documentary, not from experience, but I prayed it would work. I reached for the water cup and took a large gulp, swallowing the liquid loudly. I opened my mouth to show him it was empty, lifting my tongue just enough to look convincing, but not enough to reveal the payload. The orderly grunted, satisfied. He turned and walked out the heavy lock, engaging with a sound like a gunshot. I was alone. I waited. I counted the seconds in my head, synchronizing them with the buzzing of the lights. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. When I was certain no one was watching through the small observation window, I leaned over the edge of the bed and spat the dissolving blue paste into the corner of the room, wiping my mouth frantically on my sleeve. The bitter taste lingered, a reminder of how close I was to losing my mind. Night fell quickly in that windowless box. The artificial lights dimmed to a low amber glow. It was now or never. I sat up and assessed my environment. The door was solid steel. The window was barred. The walls were padded. But an engineer knows that every room needs to breathe. I looked up. In the corner near the ceiling was a ventilation grate. It was small, maybe 18 inches square, covering the HVAC intake. I stood on the bed. It wasn't high enough. I dragged the heavy plastic chair over and placed it on top of the mattress. It wobbled dangerously under my weight. I reached up. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the grate. It was held in place by 4 screws. I squinted in the dim light. They weren't security screws. They were standard Phillips head screws, likely installed 30 years ago and never updated. Whoever built this place cut corners. I reached for my face. They had taken my belt and my shoes, but they had left me my glasses. I took them off. The frames were wire-thin titanium, strong and flexible. I bit down on the end of the left earpiece, flattening the tip with my molars until it was sharp and flat. It was a crude tool, but it was metal. I inserted the flattened tip into the first screw head. It fit. Barely. I began to turn. My arthritis flared instantly, a sharp hot pain shooting through my knuckles. The screw was painted over, stuck tight with years of neglect. I gritted my teeth and applied torque. I whispered a prayer to every bridge I had ever built, asking for leverage. The paint cracked with a tiny snap. The screw turned. 1 down. It took me an hour to get 3 of them out. My arms were burning, my neck was cramping, and sweat was stinging my eyes. The 4th screw was stripped. The metal driver just spun uselessly in the head. Panic began to rise in my chest. I couldn't leave it hanging. I grabbed the grate with both hands, my fingers hooking into the slats. I braced my feet against the wall and pulled. I pulled with the strength of a man who knows that if he fails, he dies in this room. The drywall crumbled. The screw ripped out of the plaster with a puff of white dust. The grate fell into my hands, heavy and sharp. I looked into the dark maw of the duct. It was tight. Galvanized steel. Rectangular. I threw my glasses onto the bed. I wouldn't need them where I was going. I hoisted myself up. My shoulders barely fit. The metal was cold against my belly. I shimmied forward, dragging my 71-year-old body inch by inch. The space smelled of dust and mold. Every movement sent spikes of agony through my knees. My elbows scraped against the rivets, tearing skin. I was an old man crawling through the intestines of a building designed to forget people. I crawled for what felt like miles, though it was likely only 50 feet. I counted the supports. I visualized the blueprints of a standard commercial building. I was looking for the exterior exhaust. Finally, I saw a grate ahead with moonlight filtering through. I reached it. I didn't have a tool to unscrew this one. I rolled onto my back in the cramped space, brought my knees up to my chest, and kicked. I kicked with every ounce of rage I had left. I kicked for the house I built. I kicked for the betrayal of my daughter. The grate flew off, clattering onto the ground below. I shimmied to the edge and looked down. It was a 10-foot drop to a patch of grass behind the facility. I didn't hesitate. I pushed myself out. I fell through the cool night air. I hit the ground hard, rolling instinctively to absorb the impact. My hips screamed in protest and the breath was knocked out of me, but I was on grass. I was outside. I lay there for a moment, staring up at the stars, gasping for air. A shadow fell over me. I tensed, ready to fight. Then a familiar voice spoke from the darkness. Efficient as always, Luther. I looked up. A black town car was parked on the service road, its engine idling quietly. Standing beside it, holding a cane he didn't really need, was Alistair Wright. He looked at me, his suit impeccable in the moonlight. "I got the signal from your watch," he said. "We have been parked here for 3 hours waiting for you to decide which wall to break." I groaned and let him help me up. His grip was strong. "You look terrible, Luther," he said, dusting off my hospital gown. "I feel terrible," I admitted, limping toward the car. "But I am free." We got into the car. The leather seats were soft and warm. Alistair handed me a bottle of water and a burner phone. "We are going to a safe house," he said as the driver pulled away. "We have a lot of work to do before morning." I looked back at the facility receding in the distance. It looked peaceful, quiet, a tomb for the living. The next morning at 8 sharp, a luxury sedan pulled up to the front entrance of Sunnyvale. Gavin stepped out wearing a suit he had bought with one of my credit cards, looking every inch the concerned son. He walked into the lobby carrying a folder of legal documents. He met the corrupt doctor at the desk. "Is it done?" Gavin asked, his voice hushed. The doctor nodded, smirking. "He is sedated in isolation. He won't be making any trouble. You can go in and get the signature. He won't even know what he is signing." Gavin smiled, that predatory smile I had come to hate. He walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing with confidence. He reached room 402. He unlocked the heavy steel door and pushed it open, expecting to see a drugged old man drooling on the pillow. Instead, he saw an empty bed. He saw a chair stacked on top of a mattress. He saw a gaping hole in the ceiling where a ventilation grate used to be. And on the pillow, right where my head should have been, was a single object. It was my glasses, folded neatly. A message. Gavin dropped the folder. The papers scattered across the floor. The power of attorney. The deed transfer. The fake medical history. They were all useless now. He stared at the empty hole in the ceiling, and for the first time he realized that the game wasn't over. The prey had escaped, and the hunter was about to become the hunted. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons. I walked in not as a fugitive on the run from a corrupt mental institution, but as a man reclaiming his stature. Alistair had booked the room under the name Marcus Freeman, using a corporate account that bypassed the usual credit checks. The air inside smelled of lemon zest and expensive lilies, a stark contrast to the bleach and desperation of the Sunnyvale facility. Viola was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the Chicago skyline. When she turned, her face was a mask of stoic resolve, but her eyes betrayed the terror she had lived through for the last 24 hours. She didn't say a word. She just walked across the plush carpet and buried her face in my chest. I held her tightly, feeling the tremors in her small frame. "I am here, V," I whispered into her hair. "I am not going anywhere." We didn't unpack because we didn't have anything to unpack. We were ghosts in a palace. Alistair had ordered clothes for us, high-end suits and dresses that fit our station, not the rags Gavin thought we deserved. I took a shower, scrubbing the smell of the institution off my skin, watching the gray water swirl down the drain. When I came out, room service had arrived. A bottle of vintage Pinot Noir and a steak dinner sat on a silver cart. I poured 2 glasses. My hand was steady. The wine tasted like iron and berries like victory. We sat on the velvet sofa, the city lights twinkling below us like a sea of diamonds. We were hidden in plain sight. Gavin and Naya thought I was wandering the streets confused and destitute. They thought I was eating out of garbage cans. Instead, I was cutting into a prime ribeye watching the world from the 50th floor. This was the calm before the demolition. I picked up the remote and turned on the large television mounted on the wall. I needed to see what they were doing. I needed to know the enemy's position. I flipped to the local news channel. It didn't take long. The banner at the bottom of the screen was bright red, missing and endangered. And there was my face. It was a photo from 5 years ago taken at a family barbecue where I had blinked mid-flash, making me look disoriented and slack-jawed. Gavin had chosen it on purpose. The camera cut to a live feed from my own front porch. Gavin and Nia were standing there surrounded by microphones. Gavin looked disheveled. His tie loosened his hair mussed perfectly to suggest a man on the edge of a breakdown. He was holding Naya's hand. Nia looked small and broken, wiping her eyes with a tissue. The reporter thrust a microphone into Gavin's face. "Mr. Banks, please tell us what happened." Gavin looked directly into the camera. His performance was Oscar-worthy. "We are just devastated," he choked out. "My father-in-law, Luther, has been struggling with dementia for months. We tried to get him help. We tried to keep him safe. But last night he became violent. He attacked a nurse and escaped from the care facility we placed him in. He is confused. He is paranoid. He believes his family is trying to hurt him. If you see him, please do not approach him. He may be armed. Call the police immediately." I took a sip of wine, feeling the cold liquid burn down my throat. He was painting a target on my back. He was turning every police officer and concerned citizen in the city into his personal bounty hunter. He was delegitimizing anything I might say in the future by labeling it as the ravings of a violent lunatic. But then Nia stepped up to the microphone and the knife twisted deeper. "Daddy, if you can hear this, please come home," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "We love you. We just want to take care of you. We know you are scared. Please let us help you." And to the public, she continued looking at the camera with wide, pleading eyes. "Because the search is so expensive and the medical bills are piling up, we have started a GoFundMe page to help bring Luther home. Please donate. Help us find my father before he hurts himself." I watched the ticker on the screen. The fund had already raised $8,000. My jaw tightened until my teeth ached. They were monetizing my destruction. They were using my name and my alleged insanity to grift strangers out of their money. They weren't just trying to find me to silence me. They were turning my disappearance into a profit center. Viola set her wine glass down on the marble table with a sharp clatter. "That girl," she whispered, her voice shaking with a mix of grief and fury. "That girl is dead to me, Luther. She stood there and lied to the whole city. She is begging for money to hunt her own father." I reached over and took the remote, muting the sound. I stared at Gavin's face frozen on the screen. He looked triumphant behind his mask of grief. He thought he had checkmated me. He thought that by controlling the narrative, he controlled the outcome. He believed that a 71-year-old man without a phone or a wallet would be helpless against the power of the media. I looked at Alistair, who was sitting in the armchair, tapping away on his tablet. "They want a wandering, senile old man," I said, my voice low and hard. "They want a spectacle. Let us give them one." Alistair looked up. "What do you have in mind, Luther?" I outlined the plan. It was an engineering solution to a communication problem. We needed to create noise, signal interference. We needed to flood their system with so much data that they couldn't filter the truth from the fiction. Alistair smiled, a wicked glint in his eye. He made a phone call to a contact he knew from his pro bono work with veterans. Within 2 hours, we had a team on the ground. We hired 15 men. Real homeless men, veterans who had been ignored by the city men who knew the streets better than any cop. We paid them $500 each cash. We gave them beige windbreakers and fedoras similar to the one I wore in the photo. And we gave them signs. Cardboard signs written in thick black marker. "I am Luther Banks." One sign read, "I am not lost, I am free." Another said, "Ask my son-in-law about the money," a third declared. We deployed them to 15 different high-traffic neighborhoods across Chicago. One was sent to the park across from the police station. One was sent to the upscale mall where Eleanor liked to shop. One was sent to the street right in front of the TV station that had just interviewed Gavin. The effect was immediate. Social media began to light up. People were posting photos of Luther Banks in Lincoln Park, Luther Banks in the Loop, Luther Banks on the South Side. The police tip line was flooded with sightings. Gavin's phone would be ringing off the hook. He would have to run down every lead, terrified that one of them might actually be me, terrified that I was talking to people. He would be chasing ghosts all over the city. The police would grow frustrated with the false alarms. The public would get confused. The narrative of the helpless lost senior would dissolve into chaos. I stood up and walked to the window looking down at the city. Somewhere down there, Gavin was panicking. He was realizing that his simple narrative was fraying. He was realizing that the old man wasn't just wandering aimlessly. The old man was fighting back. I raised my glass to the reflection in the window. "Run, Gavin," I whispered. "Run until your legs give out. Because while you are chasing shadows, I am coming for the house." I sat in the leather armchair of the hotel suite, staring at the laptop screen with the cold detachment of a demolition expert watching a building rigged to blow. The feed was coming from 3 hidden cameras I had installed in my living room months ago, not out of paranoia but for security. Now they were broadcasting the desecration of my life. My living room, my sanctuary, had been turned into a bazaar. Strangers were tramping through my house, tracking mud on the rugs Viola had picked out. They were picking up my porcelain figurines, tapping on my crystal glassware, and appraising the value of 40 years of memories. Standing in the center of it all, holding a gavel he had probably bought at a toy store, was Gavin. He was wearing a new suit, navy blue pinstripe that fit him poorly around the shoulders. He looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. He was sweating under the lights, shouting out starting bids with a manic energy that stank of desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice cracking slightly, "we are here to liquidate the estate of Luther Banks. My father-in-law has tragically lost his capacity to manage his affairs, and we must sell these assets to fund his specialized care. It is a tragedy, truly, but we must be practical." Lies. Every word was a structural failure. He didn't have the authority to sell a single spoon. The power of attorney was a forgery. The deed was in a trust. He was selling property he did not own to people who did not know they were buying stolen goods. But Gavin didn't care about legality. He cared about liquidity. He needed cash fast. The loan sharks were circling, and he was throwing my life overboard to keep his own head above water. I watched him sell Viola's silver tea set for a fraction of its value. I watched him sell my collection of first-edition engineering textbooks for pennies on the dollar. My heart hammered against my ribs, a rhythmic thud of rage. But I didn't call the police. Not yet. The police stop crimes. I wanted to create a crime so undeniable, so documented, and so catastrophic that Gavin would never see the outside of a prison cell again. I needed him to commit grand larceny on camera. I needed him to sign a contract. I picked up my burner phone and dialed a number. It connected to an earpiece worn by a man standing in my driveway. His name was Marcus, but for today he was Mr. Sterling. He was a former actor turned private security contractor, a man with a voice like velvet and a presence that screamed old money. He was my Trojan horse. "Go in," I said. On the screen I saw the front door open. The crowd parted instinctively. Marcus walked in wearing a beige linen suit and sunglasses he didn't remove indoors. He looked like he owned the block. He didn't look at the small items. He walked straight to the center of the room where Gavin had placed the centerpiece of the auction. It was a large, heavy wooden chest with brass fittings and intricate carvings. I had told Gavin years ago that it was a Civil War-era campaign chest worth $50,000. Gavin had believed me because Gavin believed anything that had a dollar sign attached to it. Marcus circled the chest, running a gloved hand over the wood. Gavin's eyes locked onto him. He smelled money. He stopped the auction for the toaster oven and hurried over. Sir Gavin said, his voice dropping to an obsequious purr. "You have an eye for quality. This is the crown jewel of the collection, authentic 19th century. Marcus tapped his earpiece discreetly, appearing to adjust his glasses. I fed him the line. "Ask him about the provenance," I whispered. "Ask him for the papers." "Do you have the provenance?" Marcus asked, his voice bored. "The authentication papers." Gavin didn't blink. Of course he lied, smooth as oil. "My father-in-law kept immaculate records. We have the certificates in the safe. We can provide them upon transfer of funds. Liar. There were no papers because there was no antique. I had built that chest myself in the garage 10 years ago using distressed pine from Home Depot and brass handles I bought on eBay. I had stained it with tea and vinegar to age it and beat it with a chain to create wear marks. It was a theatrical prop, a woodworking experiment. It was worth maybe $200 in materials. But to a greedy man, it looked like a gold mine. "I will open the bidding at $5,000, Marcus said. Gavin's eyes bulged. 5,000. He looked around the room. "Does anyone hear 10? Silence. The neighbors knew I built furniture. They probably recognized the wood, but they were too polite or too confused to speak up. 10,000, Marcus said, raising his own bid. "I want it. I do not have time for games." Gavin was practically vibrating. 10,000. Going once. 15, I whispered into the phone. 15,000, Marcus said. "But I want to take it now. Today." Gavin looked like he might faint. $15,000 was enough to keep his knees unbroken for another month. "Sold," he shouted, slamming the gavel down so hard it chipped the finish on my dining table. "Sold to the gentleman in the linen suit." Marcus didn't smile. He pulled a checkbook from his pocket. "I will write you a check." Gavin stopped him. "No checks," he said quickly. "Cash or wire transfer only. Immediate release of funds. We have had issues with banks freezing assets due to the legal nature of the conservatorship." It was a clumsy lie covering the fact that he couldn't cash a check made out to Luther Banks. Marcus looked at him over the rim of his sunglasses. "I can have a courier bring cash within the hour, but I need a bill of sale, a binding contract stating that you have the legal right to sell this item and that you guarantee its authenticity." "I will sign anything you want," Gavin said, his greed overriding every survival instinct he possessed. An hour later, I watched on the screen as a messenger bag was placed on my dining table. It contained $50,000 in prop money that Alistair had acquired from a movie supply house. To the naked eye, it looked real. To the touch, it felt real. Gavin didn't check the serial numbers. He just saw stacks of green. He signed the document Marcus presented with a flourish. The document was a confession. It stated clearly that Gavin claimed sole ownership and authority. It stated he was selling an antique of high value. By signing it, he was committing fraud, forgery, and theft by deception all in one ink stroke. Marcus handed over the bag. Gavin clutched it to his chest like a newborn baby. "Pleasure doing business with you," Marcus said. Two burly movers came in and hauled the fake chest away. As soon as the door closed, Gavin didn't call the nursing home to pay for my care. He didn't call Nia. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number I didn't recognize. I looked it up later. It was a high-end car dealership. "Yeah," he said into the phone, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "I have the down payment. I want the Porsche, the black one. I am coming down right now." I sat back in the hotel room and took a sip of cold water. He had just sold a piece of pine lumber for 50 grand. He had committed a felony on camera, and now he was going to blow the evidence on a sports car. The sheer stupidity was almost insulting. He thought he was a criminal mastermind. He didn't realize he was just a rat who had taken the cheese and snapped the bar right across his own neck. I closed the laptop. The trap was full. Now it was time to dispose of the pest. The heavy oak door of the hotel suite opened, and Alistair walked in. He wasn't smiling. Usually when he found a crack in the opposition's case, he had a certain bounce in his step, a glint of victory in his eyes. Today he looked heavy. He looked like a man carrying a burden he didn't want to deliver. He placed a thick manila envelope on the coffee table in front of me. It sat there like a loaded weapon. Viola was sitting by the window reading her Bible, but she closed it immediately, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. Luther Alistair said, his voice low and grave. "We thought we knew what we were dealing with. We thought Gavin was a desperate man trying to pay off bad debts. We thought he was a gambler, a failed investor, a leech. We were wrong. He isn't just incompetent. He is methodical, and he isn't doing this alone." I stared at the envelope. My hands felt cold. "What did you find, Alistair?" "Open it." I slid the photos out onto the marble table. They were high-resolution surveillance shots taken with a telephoto lens. The first few showed Gavin at a gas station filling up his truck. Nothing unusual, but the location stamp said Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That was 2 hours north. Gavin hated driving north. He complained about the tolls. The next photo showed him pulling into the driveway of a modest suburban house. It wasn't a crack den, it wasn't a casino, it was a family home with a tricycle on the front lawn. In the next image, the front door opened. A woman stepped out. She was young, maybe 25. She was blonde, pretty in a generic sort of way, and very pregnant. She wasn't just greeting him, she was kissing him. It was the kind of kiss you give a husband coming home from war. Familiar. Possessive. I felt Viola gasp beside me, but the next photo was the one that stopped my heart. Gavin was kneeling on the grass holding a little boy. The boy was maybe 3 years old. He had Gavin's nose. He had Gavin's chin. Gavin was laughing, throwing the boy into the air. It was a picture of pure paternal joy, a joy he had never shown around Naya, a joy he had claimed he couldn't afford because of the stress of his debts. "He has a second family," Alistair said quietly. "Her name is Tiffany. She thinks he is a traveling pharmaceutical sales rep. She thinks his name is Greg. They have been together for 4 years. The boy's name is Tyler." I sat back, the leather of the couch creaking under my weight. 4 years. My daughter had been married to him for 5. He had started this other life almost immediately. While Nia was working double shifts to cover his imaginary investment losses, Gavin was playing house in Wisconsin. While Nia was crying in my kitchen begging me to go to prison to save his life, Gavin was building a backup plan. I picked up the next document in the stack. It was a printout from a real estate website. It was a listing for a 4-bedroom house in a gated community outside of Milwaukee. The asking price was $600,000. Across the top of the page was an email chain between Gavin and a realtor. Subject: closing date. Body: I have the cash for the down payment. My uncle is liquidating some assets for me. We should be able to close by the 1st of the month. My uncle, that was me. I was the uncle. I was the liquidation sale. The $50,000 he had just stolen from the fake auction wasn't going to a loan shark. There were no loan sharks. There was no cartel threatening to break his legs. There was just Tiffany and a new house with a white picket fence. The realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. The sheer scale of the deception was architectural in its complexity. Gavin wasn't trying to pay off a debt to save his life. He was cashing out. He was liquidating the Banks family empire, my house, my savings, my pension to fund his escape. He was going to take everything I had built over 40 years, strip it down to the studs, and use the lumber to build a castle for his mistress. And Nia. What was the plan for Nia? I found the answer in a text message log Alistair's investigator had pulled from the cloud. It was a conversation between Gavin and Tiffany. Tiffany asked, "When are you finally going to leave her? You promised Greg," Gavin replied. "Soon, baby. The old man is almost out of the way. Once the house sells, I will file for divorce. I will leave her with the debt. We will be ghosts." He was going to leave her with nothing. He was going to steal her inheritance, destroy her credit, ruin her father, and then abandon her in the wreckage while he drove off into the sunset with his new family. He wasn't just a thief. He was a sociopath. He looked at my daughter, the woman who washed his clothes and cooked his meals and believed his lies, and he saw nothing but a resource to be mined until it was empty. I looked at the photo of Naya on my phone. It was her wedding day. She looked so happy, so radiant. I remembered walking her down the aisle. I remembered Gavin gripping my hand, his palms sweating, promising to take care of her. I had looked him in the eye and I had seen weakness, but I hadn't seen evil. I had failed her. An engineer is supposed to spot the flaws in the foundation before the building goes up. I had let my daughter move into a house built on quicksand. Viola was crying, silent tears running down her face. She touched the photo of the little boy. "That child," she whispered. "He is innocent Luther, but he is living on stolen time." I stood up and walked to the window. The city of Chicago lay spread out before me, a grid of lights and concrete. I felt a pain in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. It was the pain of a father who knows he has to break his child's heart to save her life. Nia didn't know. She believed in the loan sharks. She believed Gavin was a victim of bad luck. She believed she was fighting for her marriage. If I told her now, if I just showed her these photos, she might not believe me. She might think I faked them. Gavin had his claws so deep in her psyche that she would reject the truth to protect the illusion. Denial is a powerful fortification. You cannot chip away at it. You have to blow it up. "She has to see it, Alistair," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. "I cannot just tell her. She needs to see the monster without his mask." Alistair nodded. "It will destroy her, Luther." "I know," I replied, closing my eyes. "It will break her into 1,000 pieces. But a broken bone can set. A broken bone can heal stronger than it was before. But if I let this cancer stay, she will die. She will wither away serving a man who laughs at her behind her back. I turned back to them. My decision was made. It was the hardest decision of my life, harder than walking away from the house, harder than crawling through that vent. I had to be the villain one last time. I had to let the play continue to its final act. We proceed, I said. We proceed with the dinner. We let him think he has won. We let him gloat. And then when he feels safe, when he thinks he is untouchable, we turn on the lights. I looked at the photo of Gavin kissing his mistress one last time. Then I threw it back onto the table. "Enjoy your new house, Gavin," I whispered. "Because the rent is coming due, and the landlord is very angry." The rain was falling in a cold, steady drizzle that soaked through the shoulders of my tattered trench coat. It was a theatrical prop Alistair had sourced from a costume shop, distressed to look like it had been slept in for a decade. Next to me, Viola shivered, pulling a torn wool blanket tighter around her frame. We stood on the front porch of my daughter's house. It was a house I had helped them buy, a house I had inspected for structural flaws before they signed the mortgage. Now it looked like a fortress of indifference. The windows were glowing with warm yellow light, and I could smell roast chicken wafting through the vents. It was the smell of a family dinner that we were excluded from. I raised my hand and knocked. It wasn't the confident knock of a father visiting his children. It was the weak, hesitant rapping of a beggar. I waited. I could hear footsteps inside, heavy and confident. The deadbolt slid back. The door swung open. Gavin stood there holding a glass of red wine. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and expensive jeans, looking every inch the successful man he pretended to be. When he saw us, his lip curled in immediate instinctive revulsion. He didn't see his in-laws. He saw two dirty problems standing on his welcome mat. He started to close the door, but I jammed my foot in the jamb. "Gavin, please," I croaked, my voice rough with feigned exhaustion. "We have nowhere to go. The shelters are full. We haven't eaten in 2 days. Just a little food, please." Gavin looked past me, scanning the street to see if anyone was watching. The street was empty. He looked back at us, a cruel glint entering his eyes. He didn't invite us in. He didn't call Nia. He leaned against the doorframe and took a sip of his wine. "You are hungry, Luther?" he asked, his voice dripping with amusement. "You want a handout. After you humiliated me at the auction, after you ran away like a coward, you come crawling back to my door begging for scraps." I lowered my head, letting my shoulders slump. "I am sorry, Gavin," I whispered. "I was confused. I just want to rest. Please help us." He stared at us for a moment, calculating. Then he smiled. It was a smile devoid of humanity. "Wait here," he said. He left the door open just a crack. I squeezed Viola's hand. She was trembling with rage, not cold, but she held her position. We were actors on a stage, and we had to hit our marks. Gavin returned a minute later. He wasn't carrying plates. He wasn't carrying the roast chicken. He was holding a plastic dog bowl. It was battered and chewed around the edges. Inside was a congealed lump of wet dog food mixed with what looked like old spaghetti noodles from the trash. He held it out to me like he was feeding a stray mutt. "Here," he said. "Buster didn't finish his dinner. It is high protein, good for the joints. Eat up, old man." I stared at the bowl. The smell was nauseating. I looked up at him, my eyes wide with feigned shock. "Gavin, this is dog food," I stammered. "It is food," Gavin snapped, his voice hardening. "You said you were hungry. Beggars cannot be choosers. Take it or starve." Behind him in the hallway, Nia appeared. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel. When she saw us huddled in the rain, when she saw her husband offering her parents dog food, she stopped dead. Her face went pale. "Gavin," she breathed a sound of pure horror. "What are you doing? That is Mom and Dad." Gavin didn't even turn around. "Shut up, Nia," he barked. "They chose this. They ran away. They made their bed. Now they can eat in it." Nia took a step forward, her eyes locked on the bowl in his hand. "Gavin, give them real food. Please, this is sick." Gavin spun on her, his face contorted with a sudden vicious anger. "Sick," he hissed. "You know what is sick, Nia. Being broke is sick. Living in fear of having your legs broken is sick. Your father has the cure. He has a $2 million house sitting there doing nothing while we drown. He wants to eat like a human being. He can pay for it." He turned back to me, thrusting the bowl into my chest. "You want a hot meal, Luther? You want a bed? It is simple. I have the papers right here on the hall table. You sign the deed transfer tonight. You sign the house over to me. You do that and I will give you $100 cash. You can go buy yourself a steak and a motel room. You can buy all the medicine you want." I looked at Nia, waiting for her to scream, waiting for her to push him aside and drag us into the warmth, but she didn't. She stood there paralyzed. She looked at the dog food, then at her husband, and then she looked down at her feet. She was witnessing the ultimate degradation of her parents, and she was too terrified of her husband to stop it. She was broken. The structure had failed. I took the bowl. My hands were shaking, but not from palsy. I was shaking with the effort of not dropping the act and strangling him. I looked at the food, then up at Gavin. "I cannot sign," I whispered. "My hands shake too much. You saw the power of attorney. I cannot write my name." Gavin laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. "Oh, don't worry about that, Luther. I don't need your hand to be steady. I just need your consent. I already mastered your signature." I froze. This was it, the payload. But I needed him to be specific. I needed him to say the words clearly for the record. "What do you mean?" I asked, playing the confused, senile old man. Gavin leaned in close, his breath smelling of wine and arrogance. He lowered his voice, but he spoke clearly, enunciating every syllable for my benefit. "I mean, I forged it, you old fool. I forged your signature on the power of attorney. I forged it on the bank transfer requests. I have been signing your name better than you do for weeks. I just need you to touch the pen to the deed so Nia sees it, so she can say you did it willingly. You make a mark and I will fix the rest later, just like I fixed the others." He had admitted to forgery. He had admitted to fraud. And he had done it while taunting his victim. He straightened up, looking proud of his own criminality. "So what is it going to be, Luther? The dog food or the pen?" I looked at the bowl in my hands. I looked at my daughter, who was weeping silently in the hallway, a ghost in her own home. And then I looked directly into the third button of my trench coat. Behind that button was a high-definition lens. Inside the lining of the coat was a digital recorder transmitting the feed directly to a secure cloud server. Alistair was watching. The police were watching. The trap hadn't just snapped shut. It had crushed his neck. I dropped the bowl. It hit the porch with a wet slap, splattering dog food over Gavin's expensive Italian loafers. "Oops," I said, my voice suddenly steady and strong, devoid of the tremor I had faked for days. I must have lost my grip. Gavin looked down at his shoes, his face turning purple. "You senile piece of trash," he screamed, raising his hand as if to strike me. I didn't flinch. I stood up straight, expanding my chest to its full breadth, shedding the posture of the broken old man. I looked him in the eye with the cold, hard stare of a man who has stared down union bosses and corrupt inspectors for 40 years. "Go ahead, Gavin," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Hit me. Add assault to the list. You have already confessed to forgery and fraud. Why not go for the trifecta?" Gavin froze his hand, hovering in the air. He saw the change in my eyes. He saw the clarity. Confusion flickered across his face. "What did you say?" I reached up and tapped the button on my chest. I said, "Smile, Gavin. You are on camera. And you just gave the performance of your life." I turned to Viola, who was looking at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Come on, V," I said, offering her my arm. "Let us go get a real dinner. I think we are done here." We walked off the porch, leaving Gavin standing in the rain with dog food on his shoes and the realization slowly dawning on him that he had just signed his own confession. Nia watched us go from the doorway, her mouth open, her tears stopping as the shock set in. She realized then that the parents she thought were helpless were the only ones in control. And as we walked down the driveway to the waiting car, I knew that tomorrow morning when the sun rose over the city, the demolition would begin in earnest. The conference room at the downtown title company smelled of fresh coffee and expensive ink. It was a smell Gavin probably associated with victory, but to me it smelled like a trap waiting to spring. I was not in the room, but Alistair had a paralegal sitting in the corner pretending to be a notary assistant, and she was streaming the audio directly to my burner phone. I listened from the safety of the hotel room as Gavin sat at the head of the polished mahogany table. He was sitting across from Mr. Thorne, a legitimate real estate investor from New York who had flown in specifically for this property. Thorne was a man who dealt in cash and speed, and he had a briefcase open next to him containing a cashier's check for $2 million. Gavin was practically vibrating with adrenaline. I could hear the nervous tapping of his pen against the wood. He was minutes away from the payoff he had killed for. He was minutes away from taking my life's work, my Victorian home, with the hand-carved moldings and the garden Viola loved, and converting it into a getaway fund for his mistress. He was wearing his best suit, trying to look like a grieving son doing a difficult duty, but his greed was leaking out of his pores. I could hear him making small talk, trying to rush the process. So, Mr. Thorne, once we sign the deed transfer, the funds are released immediately, correct? I need to settle my father-in-law's medical bills today. Thorne's voice was bored and transactional. Yes, provided the title is clean and your authority is verified. The check is cut. We just need the signatures. Gavin let out a breath he must have been holding for days. Excellent. I have the power of attorney right here. He slid the document across the table. The paper hissed against the varnish. That was the document I had signed with my left hand. The document where I had feigned a tremor so violent the pen had danced across the page. Gavin watched Thorne pick it up. He held his breath. He wasn't thinking about me. He wasn't thinking about Nia. He was thinking about the house in Milwaukee. He was thinking about erasing his debts and disappearing. He felt the weight of the $2 million as if it were already in his pocket. He reached for the deed, his hand shaking with anticipation. Just sign here, right? The heavy glass door of the conference room didn't just open. It exploded inward with a force that rattled the window panes. Alistair Wright stepped into the room. He didn't look like a lawyer in that moment. He looked like an avenging angel in a three-piece charcoal suit. Behind him stood Sheriff Miller, a man I had played poker with every Tuesday for 20 years, a man who knew the difference between a criminal and a victim. Stop! Alistair boomed, his voice filling the room and silencing the hum of the air conditioner. Put the pen down. This transaction is fraudulent. I heard the sound of a chair scraping violently against the floor. Gavin had jumped up. Who are you? He shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Get out of here. We are in the middle of a private closing. Security, get these men out. Alistair ignored him. He walked straight to the table and placed a large hand firmly on top of the deed covering the signature line. I am Alistair Wright, attorney for the Banks Family Trust, and you, Gavin, are attempting to sell property that does not belong to the man you claim to represent. Gavin laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. That is a lie. I have the power of attorney. Look at it. Luther signed it himself. He gave me control over all his assets. I am his legal guardian. Alistair smiled. I could hear the smile in his voice. It was cold and sharp like a scalpel. That document gives you control over Luther Banks's personal assets, Gavin. That is true. But this house hasn't belonged to Luther Banks for 5 years. The room went silent. I could hear Gavin's breathing, rapid and shallow. What are you talking about? Luther Banks transferred the deed of this property into an irrevocable trust. 5 years ago, Alistair explained, his voice calm and deadly. He is merely the tenant. The owner is the Banks Family Trust. And as the trustee, I did not authorize this sale. You are trying to sell a bridge you do not own, son. Gavin stammered, his bravado crumbling like wet drywall. No, that is impossible. He never told me about a trust. He signed the paper. He gave me the house. Alistair leaned in closer. The microphone picked up the rustle of his suit fabric. Luther didn't tell you a lot of things, Gavin. For instance, he didn't tell you that he is right-handed. Gavin fell silent. What? Alistair reached down and picked up the power of attorney document. He held it up for Mr. Thorne to see. Look at the signature, gentlemen. Look closely. Gavin stared at it. Thorne leaned in. I knew exactly what they were seeing. They were seeing the jagged, shaky scrawl of a left hand pretending to be infirm. But more importantly, they were seeing the letters LutherBunks. Bunks. Alistair read aloud, enunciating the vowel with savage clarity. Not Banks. Bunks. You tried to sell a $2 million property using a legal document signed by a fictitious person named Luther Bunks. Thorne stood up. The sound of his chair hitting the wall was loud and final. You brought me a forged document. He growled, his voice low and dangerous. You wasted my time with a forgery. Gavin started to hyperventilate. No, wait, it is a typo. He is old. He shook. It is just a mistake. I can fix it. I can get him to sign again. Alistair shook his head. It is not a typo, Gavin. It is a trap, and you walked right into it. That signature proves two things. First, that the document is void. Second, that you didn't even care enough to check the spelling of the name of the man you were robbing. It proves intent to defraud. Thorne snapped his briefcase shut. The locks clicked with a sound like a cell door closing. He grabbed the handle. I am done here. If you contact me again, I will have my legal team bury you. He stormed out of the room, leaving Gavin standing alone in the wreckage of his plan. Gavin looked at the sheriff, his eyes wild. Sheriff, listen to me. The old man tricked me. He is senile. He doesn't know what he is doing. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. He doesn't look senile to me, son. In fact, he looks like the smartest man in the room, and you look like a man who just tried to steal $2 million in front of a police officer. Gavin backed away until he hit the window. He looked down at the street below. He looked at the door. He looked at the empty table where the check used to be. The money was gone, the house was gone, the escape plan was gone. Panic, true primal panic, set in. He realized then that he wasn't the predator. He was the prey, and the walls were closing in fast. Gavin looked at the heavy glass door of the notary office, and I could see the animal panic rising in his eyes. He realized the walls were closing in. He realized the check for $2 million was never going to be cashed. He realized the house in Milwaukee was a fantasy that just evaporated into smoke. He looked at Alistair standing like a stone sentinel by the table. He looked at Sheriff Miller blocking the only exit. The fight-or-flight response kicked in and Gavin chose flight. He didn't think about his wife. He didn't think about his unborn child or his secret family. He thought only of his own skin. He lunged. He moved with a desperate, frantic energy, scrambling toward the door, his expensive Italian loafers slipping on the polished hardwood floor. He tried to shove past the sheriff, aiming for the gap between Miller and the doorframe. But Sheriff Miller was not a man to be moved. He had spent 30 years wrestling drunk drivers and breaking up bar fights. He simply shifted his weight, dropped his shoulder, and let Gavin run right into him. Gavin slammed into the sheriff like a bird hitting a patio door. The impact knocked the wind out of him. He bounced off, stumbling back and crashing into a decorative plant stand, sending a fern sprawling across the floor in a shower of dirt and pottery. "Let me out!" Gavin screamed, his voice high and shrill. "I haven't done anything. This is a civil dispute. You have no right to hold me. I want my lawyer. I am leaving." He tried to scramble up to run again, but Miller placed a heavy hand on his chest, pinning him against the wall. "You are not going anywhere, son," Miller said, his voice calm and terrifyingly deep. "The forgery is a civil matter, yes. We can argue about signatures all day, but I am not here for the house. I am here for the box." Gavin froze. His eyes darted around the room. "What box?" He stammered, feigning ignorance but sweating profusely. "I don't know what you are talking about." The sheriff reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a clear plastic evidence bag containing a high-resolution photograph. He held it up so Gavin could see it. It was a macro shot of a piece of clear packing tape. The lighting in the photo highlighted the ridges of a fingerprint trapped in the adhesive. "We analyzed the package sent to Luther Banks on Father's Day," Miller said. "The one with the serial number filed off the gun. The one with the kilo of cocaine. You were very careful with the outside of the box, Gavin. You wiped it down. You wore gloves when you addressed it, but you made a mistake. An amateur mistake. An arrogant mistake." Gavin stared at the photo, his breathing shallow and rapid. Miller continued, his voice relentless. "When you were taping the box shut, you struggled with the tape gun, didn't you? The tape got twisted. You weren't wearing gloves then, were you? You used your bare hand to pull the tape straight. You pressed your thumb against the sticky side, the adhesive side, to hold it taut while you smoothed it down onto the cardboard. And then you sealed it. You trapped your own fingerprint between the tape and the box. We lifted a perfect right thumbprint from the sticky side of the tape, Gavin. We ran it through the system. It matches you, not Luther. You." The logic was irrefutable. A fingerprint on the outside of a box could be explained away. You could say you handled the mail. You could say you moved it for your father-in-law. But a fingerprint on the sticky underside of the tape sealing the contraband inside could only be placed there by the person who packed the box. It proved possession. It proved intent. It proved manufacturing and distribution. You mailed a kilo of cocaine and an illegal firearm to a 71-year-old man, Miller said. You tried to frame him for a federal crime. That is not a civil dispute, Gavin. That is a felony with a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years. The color drained from Gavin's face, leaving him looking gray and waxen. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogance was gone. The bravado was gone. There was only the crushing weight of forensic science. He slumped against the wall, his legs giving out. He knew it was over. He knew there was no lawyer in the world who could explain away a fingerprint sealed inside the crime scene. Sheriff Miller spun him around. Gavin didn't fight. He was limp, a marionette whose strings had been cut. Miller pulled his arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud in the quiet office. Clack, clack. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of a steel trap finally catching the rat. As the metal bit into his wrists, Gavin snapped. He didn't cry. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He screamed. He threw his head back and howled, a sound of pure, impotent rage. He set me up, he shrieked, struggling against the cuffs. The old man set me up. He made me do it. He drove me to this. Alistair watched him with cold eyes. Luther didn't make you do anything, Gavin. It is his fault, Gavin yelled, saliva flying from his mouth. He has millions. He has millions hidden away in a trust, and he watched us drown. He wouldn't give me a dime. He forced me to steal. He forced me to frame him. If he had just given me the money, none of this would have happened. He is the criminal. He is the one who ruined this family. He was blaming me for his own greed. He was blaming me for his own weakness. Even in handcuffs, he couldn't take responsibility. He truly believed he was the victim. He believed he was entitled to my life's work and that my refusal to hand it over justified his attempt to destroy me. Sheriff Miller shoved him toward the door. Save it for the judge, son. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you start using it. They dragged him out of the office, past the stunned receptionist, past the empty table where the $2 million check had been. I watched on the video feed as they put him into the back of the cruiser. He was still screaming, still blaming the world for the consequences of his own actions. I closed the laptop. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy, hollow sadness. The pest was removed. The structure was safe. But the damage to the family was catastrophic. And now I had to deal with the wreckage he left behind. The phone rang. It was Nia. The sliding doors of the precinct burst open and Nia marched in. She didn't look like the broken woman who had watched me eat dog food on her porch the night before. She looked like a hurricane of misplaced vengeance. Her hair was wild, her eyes were swollen almost shut from crying, and she was screaming my name before she even cleared the metal detectors. She didn't see a father who had just survived an assassination attempt. She saw the man who had put handcuffs on her husband. She lunged at me. A female officer stepped in to intercept her, but Nia was fueled by a hysterical strength. She shoved past the uniform and slammed her hands onto the table where I was sitting giving my statement. You ruined everything, she shrieked, her voice cracking with the strain. You ruined my life, Daddy. Are you happy now? Gavin is in a cell because of you. They are talking about 20 years in prison. 20 years. He is my husband. He is the father of my children. How could you be so cruel? How could you set him up like that? I sat still. I didn't flinch. I watched her rant with a cold detachment that scared me a little. This was my daughter, my flesh and blood. But as she screamed accusations at me, blaming me for the consequences of Gavin's crimes, I realized she wasn't my daughter anymore. She was Gavin's accomplice. She was a woman who had chosen to stand by a man who had tried to frame her father for drug trafficking rather than face the reality that she had married a monster. She kept going, her words tumbling out in a frantic stream of denial. He told me what happened. He told me you tricked him into signing that paper. He told me you planted the tape. You are sick, Daddy. You are a vindictive, bitter old man who couldn't stand to see us happy. You hated him from the start because he is white, because he isn't an engineer, because he isn't you. You wanted to destroy him, and you didn't care if you destroyed me to do it. Well, congratulations. I hope your house keeps you warm at night, because you don't have a daughter anymore. I hate you. I hate you. She was shaking, vibrating with rage. The officer moved to restrain her again, but I held up a hand. Let her finish, I said, my voice flat. Let her say it all. Because I wanted her to be empty before I filled her up with the truth. I wanted her to have no defenses left. Nia took a sobbing breath, wiping her nose on her sleeve. Fix this, Daddy. Drop the charges. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave him permission. If you don't, I swear to God, I will never speak to you again. I will change my name. I will erase you from my life. I looked at her. I looked at the desperation in her eyes. She truly believed she was fighting for love. She believed she was the heroine of a tragedy defending her misunderstood husband against a tyrant father. It was almost tragic how wrong she was. I reached into my coat pocket. I didn't pull out a tissue. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out the manila envelope Alistair had given me, the one labeled surveillance. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than the gun in the box. I slid it across the metal table. It stopped right in front of her hands. "Open it, Nia," I said quietly. She stared at the envelope. "What is this?" "More lies. More fake evidence you manufactured. Just open it." She snatched the envelope up, tearing the flap open with angry fingers. She pulled out the stack of photos. She looked at the first one. It was Gavin pumping gas in Milwaukee. She frowned, confused. "So what? He travels for work. You know that. Keep looking." She flipped to the next photo. Gavin's truck in the driveway of the house with the white picket fence, the tricycle on the lawn. She paused. She didn't recognize the house, but she recognized the truck. Next photo. Gavin kissing Tiffany. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was a deep, passionate embrace. Gavin's hand was on the small of her back, a gesture of possession Nia knew well. Her breath hitched. Her hands started to tremble. Next photo. Gavin holding the little boy. Tyler. The boy looked exactly like Gavin. Same eyes, same chin, same laugh. Nia stopped. The screaming died in her throat. The rage evaporated, replaced by a confusing, terrifying silence. She stared at the photo of the child. Her brain was trying to reject what her eyes were seeing. "Who is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Who are these people?" "That is Tiffany," I said, brutally honest. "And that is Tyler. He is 3 years old. Gavin has been with her for 4 years, Nia. Almost as long as he has been married to you." "No," she whimpered. "No. He travels for sales. He goes to conferences. He goes to Milwaukee," I corrected. "He goes to his other family, and you paid for it. Look at the bank statements in the back." She fumbled with the papers, dropping half of them on the floor. She grabbed the bank records. Highlighted in yellow were transfers, thousands of dollars, money from their joint savings, money she had earned working double shifts at the hospital, money she thought was going to pay off loan sharks, payment to Milwaukee Pediatric Clinic, payment to Wisconsin Power and Light, payment to Zales Jewelers. She saw a receipt for a diamond necklace, dated last Valentine's Day. Nia hadn't received jewelry for Valentine's Day. She had received a card and a promise that things would get better once the debts were paid. "He bought her a car," I said, pointing to a photo of a new Honda CR-V parked in the driveway. "He used the money you saved for your fertility treatments, Nia. That is why he said you couldn't afford IVF this year, because he bought his mistress a car." Nia made a sound like a wounded animal, a high, thin keen of agony. She dropped the papers. She sank into the chair opposite me, her legs giving out. The reality crashed down on her. There were no loan sharks. There were no dangerous men threatening to break his legs. There was just a second life funded by her sweat and my stolen retirement. She looked up at me and her eyes were hollow. "He was going to leave me," she whispered. I nodded. He was closing on a house with her next week, using the money from selling my house. He was going to take everything, Nia. He was going to leave you bankrupt and alone while he played happy family in Wisconsin. She looked at the photos scattered on the floor, the evidence of her foolishness. She had betrayed her father. She had watched her husband feed me dog food. She had begged me to go to prison, all for a man who was planning to discard her like a used wrapper. She covered her face with her hands and wailed. It wasn't the angry scream from before. It was the sound of a soul breaking. I lost everything, she sobbed into her palms. I lost my husband. I lost my money. I lost my dignity. And I lost you. I watched her cry. Part of me wanted to reach out and comfort her. Part of me wanted to be a father. But I stayed in my seat. I didn't touch her. She had made her choice. She had chosen Gavin over me time and time again. She had to feel the full weight of that choice. She had to sit in the wreckage she had helped create. "You didn't just lose me, Nia," I said, my voice hard. "You threw me away. And now you have to find your own way back." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the snot and the shame. "Daddy, help me, please." "I don't know what to do." I stood up. I buttoned my coat. I gathered my papers, leaving the photos of Gavin's betrayal scattered on the table for her to keep. "You start by standing up," I said. "You start by telling the truth to the police. And then you start figuring out how to live without a man to define you, because I am done saving you." I walked out of the interrogation room, leaving her sitting there amidst the debris of her marriage. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I might have softened. And for Nia to survive this, she didn't need a soft father. She needed to hit rock bottom so hard that the impact would finally wake her up. The courtroom was packed tight, a theater of judgment where the air was thick with the scent of floor wax and anticipation. I sat in the front row directly behind the prosecutor, my hands folded over the head of my cane. I watched the back of Gavin's head. He had cut his hair short, trying to look like a Boy Scout, trying to look innocent. He wore a modest gray suit, likely paid for by a public defender or a loan he would never repay. When his lawyer stood up, I expected a defense based on technicalities. I expected them to argue about the chain of custody or the legality of the search. I did not expect them to set the entire courtroom on fire with a lie so audacious it made the judge blink. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the defense attorney began, his voice dripping with a practiced sorrow. "You are looking at the wrong man. My client, Gavin, is not a mastermind. He is a victim of a manipulative, coercive, and abusive marriage. The real architect of this conspiracy, the person who bought the drugs, the person who devised the plan to frame her own father, is not sitting at the defense table. She is sitting right there in the witness waiting area. Her name is Nia Banks." A murmur rippled through the gallery like a wave. I stayed stone still. I watched Gavin. He had his head bowed, covering his face with his hands, pretending to weep. It was a performance designed to solicit pity. His lawyer continued, painting a picture of Gavin as a henpecked, terrified husband forced into crime by a wife desperate for her inheritance. He claimed Nia had threatened to leave him, threatened to take the children, threatened to ruin him if he didn't help her speed up her father's demise. It was a masterful inversion of reality. He was taking his own sociopathic traits and projecting them onto the woman he had already destroyed. He was willing to send the mother of his children to prison for 20 years just to shave 5 years off his own sentence. I looked toward the side door where the witnesses waited. I knew Nia was listening. I knew she could hear her husband throwing her to the wolves. And I knew that for the first time in her life, my daughter was about to stop being a doormat and start being a Banks. When the prosecutor called Nia to the stand, she didn't walk like a victim. She walked like a woman who had nothing left to lose. She sat in the witness box and looked directly at Gavin. He refused to meet her eyes. He kept his gaze fixed on the table, a coward to the bitter end. The prosecutor asked her simply, "Who planned the delivery of the package to Luther Banks?" Nia took a breath. "It was Gavin," she said, her voice clear and ringing in the silent room. "He planned it all. I just wanted to ask my dad for money. I begged him to just ask. But Gavin said it was too slow. He said my father was too stubborn. He said we needed leverage." The defense attorney jumped up, objecting, screaming about hearsay, but the judge overruled him. Nia continued her testimony, turning into a demolition. She didn't just blame him, she buried him with details. She described the night Gavin came home with a black duffel bag. She described the smell of the raw cocaine, a chemical tang that clung to his clothes. She told the jury exactly where he bought the gun. "He drove to a mechanic shop on the south side off 95th Street, she said. "He met a man named Slider. I stayed in the car. I saw him hand over a stack of cash. He came back with the revolver wrapped in an oily rag. He spent 3 hours in the garage filing off the serial number with a Dremel tool. He laughed the whole time. He said it was poetic justice. He said he was going to use the old man's own tools to frame him." The jury was scribbling notes furiously. Gavin's lawyer looked pale, but Nia wasn't done. She turned to the jury and told them about the packaging. "He wanted it to look official," she said. "He stole the Department of Health labels from a dumpster behind the county office. He practiced the handwriting for hours, trying to make it look bureaucratic, but he couldn't hide his slant. He told me it was a Father's Day gift. He laughed when he sealed it. He said, 'Happy Father's Day. Old man, I got you a one-way ticket to a cell.' It was devastating. It was the truth delivered with the raw agony of a woman who realized she had been sleeping next to a monster." Gavin finally looked up. His face was red, twisted with hate. "You liar," he hissed loud enough for the front row to hear. "You helped me. You wanted the money too." The judge banged his gavel, threatening to gag the defendant, but the damage was done. His outburst only proved his volatility. But the defense wasn't dead yet. On cross-examination, Gavin's lawyer went for the throat. He attacked Nia's character. He brought up her debts. He brought up her knowledge of the plan. He painted her as a co-conspirator who was testifying only to save her own skin, which was partially true. He created doubt. He suggested that maybe, just maybe, they were both in on it equally, or that Nia was indeed the driving force. The jury looked conflicted. They saw a messy, toxic marriage, and they weren't sure who to believe. It was a, he said, she said scenario, and in a criminal trial, doubt is the best friend of the guilty. I knew this moment would come. I had prepared for it. I leaned forward and tapped the prosecutor on the shoulder. I handed him a small USB drive. It was the silver bullet. It was the evidence that would strip away any ambiguity about Gavin's character. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, standing up. The state has one final piece of rebuttal evidence. We would like to play a video recording taken by the victim Luther Banks on the night of the alleged financial coercion. Gavin froze. He didn't know about the camera. He thought that night on the porch was just a private moment of cruelty. He didn't know he had been auditioning for his own conviction. The large screens in the courtroom flickered to life. The video was high definition and the audio was crystal clear. The jury saw two shivering figures standing in the rain. They saw me looking old and broken, wrapped in a blanket, begging for food. And then they saw Gavin. They saw him open the door holding a glass of wine, warm and arrogant. They heard his voice booming through the courtroom speakers, amplified and inescapable. Beggars cannot be choosers, Gavin's digital avatar sneered. Take it or starve. The jury watched in horrified silence as Gavin walked away and returned with the dog bowl. They saw the congealed meat. They saw the old noodles. They saw him thrusted into the hands of his 71-year-old father-in-law. Eat up, old man, Gavin said on the screen, his face twisted in a smirk of pure sadistic pleasure. Buster didn't finish his dinner. It is high protein. A gasp went through the courtroom. It wasn't a murmur this time. It was a collective intake of breath, a physical reaction to the sheer inhumanity on display. One juror, a middle-aged woman, put her hand over her mouth. Another, a man in a blue work shirt, shook his head, looking at Gavin with naked disgust. The video continued. They heard Gavin bargaining. They heard him demand the signature. And then they heard the confession. I forged your signature on the power of attorney. I forged it on the bank transfer requests. I have been signing your name better than you do for weeks. It was over. The video ended and the screen went black, but the image of that dog bowl was burned into everyone's retinas. The defense attorney didn't even stand up. He slumped in his chair, shuffling his papers, knowing there was no strategy in the world that could humanize a man who fed his elders dog food in the rain. Gavin looked at the jury. He saw their eyes. There was no doubt left. There was no confusion. There was only judgment. He looked at Nia, who was weeping silently in the gallery. He looked at me. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at him with the cold, steady gaze of a structural engineer who had identified the rot, removed the weak supports, and watched the entire corrupt edifice collapse under its own weight. He was buried, and he had dug the hole himself. The judicial system is a grinding machine, but it has gears that can be greased with the right amount of leverage. Despite the mountain of evidence against him, Gavin was granted bail. His lawyer argued that he was a first-time offender with strong community ties, and the judge set the bond at $100,000. Gavin didn't have that kind of money, but he knew people who did. He made a call to a bail bondsman on the south side, a man who charged exorbitant interest and required zero collateral other than a promise and a signature. Gavin walked out of the county jail at 4 p.m, clutching a plastic bag with his personal effects. He didn't look back. He didn't call Nia. He didn't call his parents. He had one goal and one goal only. He needed to get to his money, and he needed to get to Wisconsin. I was watching him, not physically but digitally. Alistair had placed a tracker on Gavin's phone months ago during the initial investigation, and Gavin, in his arrogance, had never changed the device. I sat in the hotel suite monitoring the little red dot moving across the map of Chicago. He didn't go home. He went straight to a 24-hour internet cafe near the bus station. He was smart enough not to use his own laptop, which was currently sitting in an evidence locker, but he wasn't smart enough to realize that his financial escape route had already been paved over. Gavin sat in a greasy booth surrounded by teenagers playing video games and typed furiously on a sticky keyboard. He was logging into a secure offshore account he had set up 6 months prior. This was where he had funneled the cash advances from the fraudulent credit cards. This was where he had deposited the money from selling my antique furniture on the black market. He believed he had a nest egg of nearly $60,000 waiting for him. Enough to grab Tiffany, enough to buy fake passports, enough to vanish into the ether. He thought he was Jason Bourne. He was about to find out he was just a broke thief with a Wi-Fi connection. He hit the enter key. I couldn't see his screen, but I knew exactly what he was seeing because I had the mirror access on my tablet. The page loaded, the bank logo appeared, and then the balance flashed on the screen. $0.00. Gavin stared at the monitor. He blinked. He hit refresh. The numbers didn't change. 0. He hit the keyboard with his fist, causing the gamer next to him to jump. He tried to access the transaction history. He wanted to see where the money went. He clicked the tab and saw a single line item dated yesterday morning. Transaction type reversal. Reason fraudulent transfer clawback. Initiated by trustee. He froze. He didn't understand. He thought he had been so careful. He thought he was the only one who knew about this account. But he had forgotten the fundamental rule of engineering. You cannot build a structure on land you do not own. When Gavin opened that account, he used my social security number as a guarantor to boost his credit rating. He thought he was being clever using my good name to secure his getaway fund. But by connecting his secret account to my identity, he brought it under the umbrella of the bank's family trust. The moment the police charged him with identity theft and fraud, Alistair filed an emergency motion with the bank. It is called a clawback provision. It allows a victim of financial fraud to freeze and recover assets that were stolen or commingled with the criminal's funds. Because Gavin had used my identity to open the account, the law viewed every penny in it as mine. I hadn't just frozen the account, I had drained it. I had transferred every single dollar he stole back into the trust's holding account. Gavin slumped in the chair. He was hyperventilating. He checked his pockets. He pulled out the thick envelope of cash he had received from the auction, the $50,000 he got from Marcus for the fake chest. He had managed to hide it in a locker at the bus station before he was arrested. He still had that. He opened the envelope, his hands shaking desperately, needing to see the green faces of presidents to calm his nerves. He pulled out a bill. He looked at it. In the dim light of the auction, it had looked perfect. But here, under the harsh fluorescent glare of the cafe, he saw the truth. He saw the words printed in small font where the motto, "In God We Trust," should have been. For motion picture, use only. It was prop money, the highest quality Hollywood counterfeit money available, legally used for movies but useless at a car dealership or a border crossing. He flipped through the stack. They were all the same. $50,000 of paper. Worthless. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He was broke. Completely and utterly destitute. He had no car, he had no house, he had no illicit fortune. He didn't even have enough real money to buy a bus ticket to Milwaukee. He grabbed his phone, his fingers fumbling as he dialed a number. I knew who he was calling. It was his Hail Mary. It was Tiffany. The call connected. I listened in. "Tiffany, baby, listen to me," Gavin said, his voice high and frantic. "I am coming. I am on my way. Pack the bags. Get Tyler ready. We are leaving tonight." There was a silence on the line. Then Tiffany's voice came through, cold and distant. "Gavin, I saw the news. No, baby, that is all lies." Gavin pleaded. "The old man set me up. He is crazy. I explained this to you. I have the money. I have the cash. We can go buy the house. We can start over. Just come get me. I am at the bus station downtown." "You are lying," Gavin Tiffany said. "The police were here." Gavin stopped breathing. "What? Detectives from Chicago? They knocked on my door an hour ago. They showed me everything, Gavin. They showed me the credit cards you opened in your mother-in-law's name. They showed me the fake power of attorney. They told me you are facing 20 years for drug trafficking." "Baby, listen." "No, you listen," Tiffany snapped. "They told me about the money. They told me you are broke. They told me the down payment check for the house bounced this morning. You don't have any money, Gavin. You never did. That is not true. I can fix this." "It is over," Tiffany said. "I am not going to prison for you. I am not raising my son on the run with a broke con artist. I told the police everything, Gavin. I gave them your other phone. I gave them the laptop you left here. Don't call me again. If you come near me or Tyler, I will call the cops myself." The line went dead. Gavin lowered the phone slowly. He stared at the blank screen. His last lifeline had just been cut. He was alone in a city that wanted him in a cage. He stumbled out of the cafe into the cold night air. He started walking aimlessly. He couldn't go back to Nia. He couldn't go to Wisconsin. He checked his pockets. He had $12 in real cash. That was it. The fortune he had killed for the empire he had tried to steal was gone. And then his phone rang. He looked at it hoping it was Tiffany calling back. It wasn't. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered it, his hand trembling. "Hello, Mr. Banks," a deep voice growled. "This is Sal. From the bond agency." Gavin swallowed. "Yeah. Hi, Sal. I am looking at your file, Mr. Banks," Sal said. "And I am seeing some disturbing things. I am seeing that the collateral you put up for the bond, the house on Elm Street, is currently under a police seal for a fraud investigation. I am seeing that the co-signer on your loan your wife just called and revoked her signature." Gavin's knees almost gave out. "She cannot do that." "She just did," Sal said, "which means you are currently in violation of your bond agreement. I need you to come into the office right now with $100,000 in cash or a new co-signer. If you don't, I am revoking your bond." I need a little time," Gavin stammered. "I can get the money. Just give me 24 hours. "You have 1 hour," Sal said. "And kid, I have guys on the street. If you try to run, if you try to leave the city, my guys will find you. And they don't carry badges. They carry baseball bats. We don't like losing money, Gavin. Be here in an hour." The call ended. Gavin stood on the street corner. To his left was the police station. To his right was the highway out of town. Behind him were the bounty hunters. He was trapped in a box of his own making. He looked at the prop money in his hand. He threw it into the gutter. The wind caught the fake bills, scattering them down the street like dry leaves. He wrapped his arms around himself, shivering violently. He had wanted to be rich. He had wanted to be powerful. Now he was just prey, and the night was full of predators. Desperation does strange things to a man who has spent his life believing he is smarter than everyone else. It strips away the veneer of civilization and leaves behind a raw, shivering animal. Gavin had 1 hour to find $100,000 or face the bond enforcement agents. He didn't have the money. He didn't have a friend left in the world. So he did what desperate, foolish men do. He walked into a 24-hour convenience store on the corner of 5th and Main. It wasn't a heist planned with the precision he had applied to destroying my life. It was a frantic impulse born of terror. I watched the security footage later with Alistair. It was pathetic. Gavin walked in his expensive suit, ruined by the rain, his eyes wild. He waited for a customer to leave, then approached the counter. He didn't have a weapon. He put his hand in his jacket pocket and pointed his finger, trying to simulate the barrel of a gun. He screamed at the clerk, a teenager earning minimum wage, to open the register. He demanded cash for a bus ticket. He wasn't asking for millions anymore. He was committing armed robbery for $40. The clerk didn't open the register. He pressed the silent alarm and stepped back. Gavin started to climb over the counter, screaming incoherently about Milwaukee and his wife. He never made it over. A delivery driver who was stocking shelves in the back aisle tackled him. It wasn't a fight. It was a collapse. Gavin hit the linoleum floor and simply gave up. He curled into a ball and wept. When the police arrived, they didn't find a mastermind. They found a broken man sobbing about how it wasn't fair. They found a man who had traded his freedom for a fantasy. The image of him being dragged out in handcuffs again, this time for a petty robbery, was the final nail in the coffin of his reputation. The businessman was dead. The convict was born. The sentencing hearing took place 3 months later. The courtroom was quiet, somber. There were no cameras this time, no sensational headlines. Just the dull, grinding machinery of justice. I sat in the back row. I needed to see it finished. I needed to inspect the final structural failure of Gavin's life. Gavin stood before the judge. He looked 10 years older. His hair was thinning, his skin gray from months in county lockup. He wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Gavin didn't rant. He didn't blame me. He didn't blame Nia. He just looked at the floor and mumbled, "I am sorry." But it was too late for apologies. The damage was done. The cracks were too deep to patch. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked at the file. She listed the charges: attempted fraud, forgery, elder abuse, possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, attempted armed robbery. It was a laundry list of bad decisions and malice. She looked over her spectacles at Gavin. "Mr. Banks, you preyed on the vulnerable," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. You targeted a man who welcomed you into his family. You plotted to destroy his mind and steal his legacy. You used your wife, your children, and the legal system as weapons. You have shown a complete lack of moral character." Gavin flinched with every word. He looked small. "The court finds that you are a danger to society," the judge continued. "I am sentencing you to 15 years in the state penitentiary. There will be no possibility of parole. You will serve every day of this sentence." 15 years. The gavel banged down with a sound like a gunshot. Gavin's knees buckled. The bailiffs had to hold him up. He looked back at the gallery, searching for someone to save him. He looked for Naya, but she wasn't there. He looked for Tiffany, but she was long gone. He looked at me. Our eyes met for a brief second. I didn't smile. I didn't look away. I just nodded once. It was a message. It is over. You built this cage, Gavin. Now you have to live in it. They led him away, the chains rattling on his ankles. The door closed behind him and the room felt lighter, as if a heavy toxic fog had been lifted. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. The air tasted sweet. I hailed a cab and went home. Not to a hotel, to my home, my house, the place I had built. That evening I was sitting on the porch swing watching the sunset when a car pulled up. It was an old beat-up sedan I didn't recognize. The door opened and Nia stepped out. She looked different. She had lost weight. She wasn't wearing her expensive clothes or her jewelry. She was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt. She carried 2 suitcases and a look of utter defeat. She walked up the driveway, slowly dragging the bags. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She didn't come up. She knew she hadn't earned the right to stand on the deck yet. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Daddy," she whispered, "I have nowhere else to go. The bank took the house. The car was repossessed. I have debts, Daddy. So many debts. I cannot find a job. No one will hire me because of the trial. I am sleeping in my car." She paused, waiting for me to invite her in. She was waiting for the father who had always fixed everything. She was waiting for me to open my arms and say, "Come inside, baby girl, it will be okay." I looked at her. I saw my daughter. I saw the child I had raised. But I also saw the woman who had asked me to go to prison. I saw the woman who had stood by while her husband tried to bury me. I stood up. I walked to the railing. I didn't open the gate. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a white envelope. I walked down the steps and held it out to her. Nia reached for it, hope flaring in her eyes. "Is this money?" she asked. "Can I come home?" I shook my head. "This is not an invitation, Nia. This is a start. Inside that envelope is cash, enough for first and last month's rent on a studio apartment in the city. There is also a list of employment agencies that specialize in helping people with difficult backgrounds. There is a grocery store on 4th Street hiring cashiers. It is honest work." She stared at the envelope, then at me. "But Daddy, I cannot do that. I am your daughter. This is my home." "No, Nia," I said, my voice gentle but firm as steel. "This is my home. You chose your home when you chose Gavin. You chose your path when you decided I was expendable. You broke the foundation of this family, Nia, and you cannot fix a foundation by painting over the cracks. You have to dig it up and start again." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "But I am alone, Daddy. I am scared." I know I said. I was scared too when they put me in that van. I was scared when they locked me in that room. Being scared is good, Nia. It wakes you up. It makes you strong. You need to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. You need to learn how to survive without a man to pay your bills or a father to clean up your messes. I pressed the envelope into her hand. "Take it. Go to the apartment. Get the job. Work hard. Pay your debts. And maybe one day when you have built a life that is truly yours, you can come back up these steps and knock on my door as a woman I can respect. But not today. But not—" "Daddy, please," she sobbed, reaching for me. I stepped back out of her reach. I turned around and walked back up the stairs. I walked across the porch and opened my front door. I looked back at her one last time, standing in the driveway, with her suitcases and her second chance. "Goodbye, Nia," I said. I stepped inside and closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. The sound echoed through the house, final and absolute. I walked into the kitchen where Viola was waiting. She had 2 cups of tea ready. She didn't ask what happened. She knew. We sat in silence, listening to the sound of a car engine starting and driving away. It was a painful sound, but it was the sound of necessary demolition. Sometimes you have to tear everything down to the ground before you can build something that will last. The sound of a hammer striking a nail is the most honest sound in the world. It is definitive. It is precise. It is the sound of something being built, or in my case, something being repaired. It has been exactly 1 year since the trial. 1 year since I watched my son-in-law being led away in chains. 1 year since I closed the door on my daughter. The seasons have changed. The winter was hard, but the spring has brought a green lushness to my garden that I haven't seen in a decade. I am out here on the perimeter of my property replacing the old cedar fence posts. They were rotting from the inside, eaten away by termites and moisture, much like the trust I had placed in my family. But I dug them out. I poured new concrete footings, and now I am installing white oak. Strong, resilient, a wood that does not rot easily. My neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, waved to me from across the street. For a while after the arrest, the neighbors looked at me with pity or suspicion. They wondered if the rumors about the drugs were true. They wondered if I really was a senile old man. But time and truth have a way of scrubbing the stain off a reputation. Now they wave with respect. They see a man who stood his ground. They see a man who protected his home. I waved back my hand, gripping the hammer handle. It felt good to be Luther Banks the engineer again, not Luther Banks the victim. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and looked at the house. It needed painting. The gutters needed cleaning. The list of chores was long, but for the first time in years, the list didn't feel like a burden. It felt like ownership. It felt like freedom. I wasn't preserving the asset for Gavin to sell. I wasn't maintaining the roof so Nia could inherit it. I was taking care of my home because it was mine. I was fixing the fence not to keep people out, but to define clearly where my world began and where the chaos of the outside ended. Boundaries. I had learned late in life that boundaries are not just physical lines on a survey map. They are the emotional fortifications that keep your soul safe. The screen door creaked open, and Viola stepped out onto the porch. She was carrying a tray with a pitcher of iced tea and a stack of envelopes. She looked beautiful. The stress lines that had etched themselves around her eyes during those dark months had softened. She wasn't looking over her shoulder anymore, waiting for the next betrayal. She walked down the steps, her movement fluid and light. She set the tray on the patio table and held up a blue envelope. Another one, she said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. This one is from Detroit. I walked over and sat down, picking up the glass of tea. The ice clinked against the crystal. Read it to me, I said. Viola opened the letter. It is from a man named Arthur, she read. He says his son tried to convince him he had dementia so he could take control of his pension fund. He says he saw your video online. He says he hired a lawyer instead of signing the papers. He kept his house Luther. He says thank you for showing him that he didn't have to be a victim just because he is 80 years old. She picked up another one. This one is from a woman in Atlanta. Her daughter was stealing her pain medication to sell. She confronted her. She kicked her out. She says she is lonely, but she is safe. I looked at the stack of mail. There were dozens of them. When I started the Banks Foundation for Elder Protection, I thought we might help a few people locally. I thought we would provide some legal advice, maybe refer a few cases to Dr. Montgomery. But the response was a tidal wave. It turned out that my story wasn't unique. It was an epidemic. All over the country, there were men and women who had worked their whole lives only to be preyed upon by the very children they had raised. They were silent because of shame. They were silent because they thought it was their duty to sacrifice. We gave them a voice, Viola said, placing her hand over mine. We gave them permission to fight back. I looked at her hand, the skin thin and papery, but the grip strong. We didn't just save ourselves, V, I said. We built a lighthouse, and now people can see the rocks before they crash. We sat there in silence for a moment, listening to the wind in the trees. I thought about the money Gavin had tried to steal. The millions in the trust. It was no longer just a number on a ledger. It was ammunition. We were using it to fund lawsuits against predatory guardians. We were using it to pay for emergency housing for seniors who had been evicted by their families. The money that was supposed to buy Gavin a Porsche and a life of leisure was now dismantling the very system he tried to exploit. It was the perfect poetic justice. Viola looked at me, her eyes searching my face. "Have you heard from her?" she asked softly. She didn't have to say the name. "Nia." I nodded. "She sent a letter to the P.O. box last week. She is still working at the grocery store. She is renting a small studio apartment on the south side. She says she is paying her own bills. She says she is sorry." Viola looked away toward the empty swing set in the backyard where Nia used to play when she was 5. "Do you believe her?" Viola asked. I took a sip of tea. "I believe she is sorry she got caught," I said. "I believe she is sorry her life is hard now. But repentance is not a feeling, Viola. Repentance is an action. It takes time. It takes years of consistent behavior to rebuild a foundation that has completely collapsed." "Will you answer her?" Viola asked. "Not yet," I replied. "Maybe not ever. She is learning how to be an adult for the first time in 35 years. If I step in now, if I rescue her, if I validate her pain, I am just handing her another crutch. She needs to walk on her own, even if she limps." I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. I looked out at the world. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. I looked directly into the lens of my own life, analyzing the structure of my heart. They say that blood is thicker than water. They say that family is everything. They tell you that a father's love should be unconditional and endless. But they don't tell you about necrosis. They don't tell you that when a limb becomes infected, when the rot sets in deep and threatens to poison the rest of the body, you have a choice to make. You can keep the limb and die with it, or you can cut it off and live. It is the hardest thing a man can do to sever his own flesh and blood. It goes against every instinct of nature. But sometimes nature is cruel. Sometimes the people who share your DNA are the ones holding the knife. I am a father. I will always be a father. I still have the memories of the little girl who wanted me to read her bedtime stories. Those memories are safe, locked away in the vault of my mind, where Gavin and the adult Nia can never touch them. But the woman who tried to send me to prison, the woman who watched me eat dog food, she is not my daughter. She is a stranger who shares my last name. I picked up my hammer. I weighed it in my hand. It was heavy. It was real. I am Luther Banks. I am 72 years old. And I have learned that before I can be a father to anyone else, I have to be a father to myself. I have to protect the child inside me, the old man inside me, the spirit inside me. I have to build a wall that evil cannot breach. I walked back to the fence. I placed a new white oak board against the post. I pulled a nail from my pouch. I set it. I raised the hammer, and I brought it down. Bang! My journey taught me that the most dangerous betrayals often come from those we invite into our homes. We are raised to believe that parental love must be sacrificial, but there is a line where sacrifice becomes self-destruction. True family is not defined by DNA, but by mutual respect, loyalty, and the safety of your soul. If someone hands you a shovel to dig your own grave, even if they call you Dad, you have the moral right to drop it and walk away. Protecting your peace isn't selfishness. It is necessary survival. You cannot keep others warm by setting your own dignity on fire. If you believe that respect should be the non-negotiable foundation of every family, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments below, did I do the right thing by closing the door on Nia, or would you have given her another chance? I read every single one. See you in the next story.